Hello. This is What If Pirate King Luffy went back in time for a new adventure. Please like and subscribe to my channel and check out the author and the fanfiction linked in the description. Enjoy. The Going Merry slowly sailed away as everyone was now on board. Luffy was dancing around with chopsticks in his nose as many others laughed. The full moon's out and the cherry blossoms are in bloom. Zoro laughed. Hey Chopper. Come and join us. Usopp yelled. Chopper just looked at them all laughing it up and having fun as he sat next to Nami. Both Usopp and Luffy came over to him to try and get him to join. Don't worry. They're a handful, but they're okay. She said with a smile. Karu. What happened to you? Vivi yelled in horror. Whatever it was, it happened to Johnny and Yasaku as well. Grace said. When they had gotten to the ship, all three were floating in the river frozen. Johnny and Yasaku were stuttering something about flowers as they tried to warm up. Why would they be swimming in the river? Nojiko asked while Karu quacked. He said Zoro went swimming in the river but never came up, so they thought he drowned and all three jumped in after him. Chopper said. Then it's all your fault. Nami said as she punched Zoro in the back of the head. You can understand Karu? Vivi asked. I originally was an animal, so I can understand them. Chopper said. So along with medicine, you can talk to animals as well. That's amazing Chopper. Nami said with a smile. Chopper just looked at her with wide eyes. You Chopper said before dancing around. Say stuff like that isn't going to make me happy, so shut up. Bastard. Then why do you sound so happy? Most of them asked while Luffy laughed. Wait. Nami Swan, what do you mean medicine? Sanji asked. Oh. Chopper here is a doctor. She said. Huh? Most of them said. You're a doctor Zoro asked. Why do you think I asked him to join us? Nami demanded. He's a reindeer that can change into 7 forms, and he's cool. Luffy said. Emergency food. Sanji said, causing Chopper to go blue in the face before he gasped. Oh no. I left my backpack behind. All my medical equipment was in it. He cried out. You mean this? Nami said as she lifted his bag up. It was in the sleigh. But how did it get there? Chopper asked. Escariha knew what you were thinking huh? Nami said. So now we've got a doctor on board huh? Alvida said as the pink snow drifted around them. That's right. Usopp said as he tried to propose a toast. The ship soon erupted into a party as everyone was now causing some chaos. Some were arguing with others, some were laughing their asses off, and some were just watching it all happen with a smile. You know, Chopper said with a smile. I'm really happy. Alright everyone. Usopp shouted. A toast to our new crewmate Chopper. Panpai. Everyone shouted as they raised their mugs. The party went on for quite some time before everyone grew exhausted. The boys fell collapsed on deck while the women had more sense to go inside a warm cabin to sleep. That was fun. Gray said as she crawled in next to Valerie. Nami, Nojiko, and Vivi shared a bed, Valerie and Grace shared a bed, and Alvida slept by herself. It was. Valerie said as she yawned and laid on the bed. You know you've changed. Huh? Grace said as she laid down next to her. I've changed. Yeah. Before we even met these guys you were always quiet and laid back. Valerie said. Now you talk more and even smile. Grace thought to herself at what Valerie said. Well I was part of an underground criminal organization. And I'm a little under 14. She said. What was I supposed to act like? Good point. Valerie said. But you know, Grace said with a smile. I did see these guys go from serious and stern to stupid and playful all the time while I was sick. And Luffy said that I had a great dream. To be a world-famous artist. Valerie asked as Grace closed her eyes and yawned. Yeah. She said. I hope I can make it come true one day. She muttered before she fell fast asleep. Valerie watched her fall asleep with a smile. You will. She thought as she too fell asleep. Soon everyone on the ship was fast asleep. All except for one. Up in the crow's nest. Nojiko volunteered to take night watch for the first half of the night. She ate the gentle snow that was falling all around with a small smile, glad that her sister was okay. If I had to, I'd have carried you all up here. She had remembered Luffy's words and felt herself tear up. Never had she met someone who would do so much for their friends. Guess that's why everyone here follows him. She thought. Hey. Someone's voice said. She snapped out of her thoughts to find Jin standing next to her. You alright? Huh? She asked before realizing she was crying and rubbed her eyes. Yeah. I'm fine. Here to relieve me? Yeah. My turn now. Jin said. Alright. Good night. Nojiko said as she made her way towards the woman's room. She stopped when she heard some noises coming from inside the cabin and decided to sneak a peek inside. She smiled and walked in to see Luffy raiding the fridge for a midnight snack. She watched him chew something before clearing her throat, causing him to jump and quickly spin around. Ah. He shouted before seeing Nojiko there smiling at him. Oh. Hi Nojiko. He said through puffed up cheeks. Sanji'll get mad if you keep raiding the fridge each night. She said as she walked over towards him. He started sweating a bit before she brought a finger to her lips. Don't worry. I won't rat you out. She said with a wink. Luffy stared as he felt that strange feeling again before swallowing his food. Really? Thanks. Luffy said before reaching into the fridge but stopped when Nojiko grabbed his hand. But if you eat everything, everyone will starve. She said. I'd rather not die of hunger. Okay. Oh. Okay. Luffy said. Why are you up Nojiko? I took the first watch tonight. Jin just relieved me, so I was heading to bed before I heard you here. She said as she stretched her arms above her head. Alright. You going to bed? Luffy asked. She didn't respond for a moment before looking him in the eyes. Did you mean what you said? She asked. Luffy just looked at her in confusion. About if we were all sick. Oh, you mean how I said I'd carry you all up the mountain? He asked before grinning. Yep. She just smiled at his answer before hugging him. I'm glad. Thank you Luffy. She said. Luffy just blushed before he smiled and returned the hug. They stayed like that for a moment while Luffy's heartbeat sped up. They pulled back a bit and smiled before Luffy just stared at Nojiko. Luffy? She asked as Luffy leaned closer. Nojiko didn't realize what was happening until their lips touched. Her eyes widened before she pulled her head back and stared at him in shock as her heart began beating against her chest. What are you doing? Huh? He said. I don't know, but I liked it. Was it bad? He asked. Every part of her wanted to say yes, but. No. She said with a smile. I liked it too. Luffy smiled back before kissing her again. Nojiko slowly closed her eyes as she kissed back. Her mind was slowly going blank as Luffy placed his tongue against her lips, which she allowed to enter her mouth. Their tongues danced as Nojiko pulled Luffy closer to deepen the kiss before they broke apart for air. Wow. Nojiko thought as they began to kiss again. Nami was right. Flashback. It was in the middle of the party that same night. Yusaku had warmed up and was now dancing with chopsticks in his nose as he showed everyone how a professional does the chopstick up the nose dance. As he was dancing alongside Luffy and Usopp, Nojiko and Nami were near the railing away from everyone else. It's smaller, but it feels just like when Luffy saved our island. Nojiko said. Yeah. Nami agreed with a smile. Luffy beats a tyrant. Everyone parties. All that's missing is him and you disappearing for the night. Nojiko whispered with a sneaky grin. Shut up. Nami said as she punched her sister in her arm, causing her to laugh. It's the truth. Nojiko laughed before calming down. Never expected you to thank him like that though. Neither did I. Nami said. Huh? What do you mean? Nojiko asked. I did like him, but all I had planned to do was kiss him. Nami said. But the moment my lips touched his I don't know. It just felt like something inside me clicked and I wanted to go further. What? Nojiko said, clearly not believing her. It's the truth. Nami said with a pout. Nojiko just stared before looking at the others as they tried to get more people to do the dance. Do you regret it? She asked. Not really, no. Nami said with a sigh. And what are you two talking about over here? Alvida asked as she strolled over and sat on the railing next to them. Huh? Nothing. Nami answered quickly. Alvida raised an eyebrow while Nojiko smirked. Is that so? Alvida asked. Nami was about to reply but was stopped due to the party getting loud. All three of them looked up before joining the other three women in laughter. They don't know how it happened, but either by will or force, all the Straw Hat men were now sporting chopsticks in their noses. Flashback ends. Both of them were now making in the cabin as Nojiko was against the wall as they both broke apart for some air. They were both panting as Luffy licked Nojiko's neck, causing her to shudder and moan. Hang on. She said. Luffy just looked at her as she slowly took off her coat. It was still cold outside, but she wasn't gonna need it in a few moments. She was wearing a light blue button-up shirt, black pants that hugged her hips, and heavy boots. There. That's a little better. She said. Why are you pointy? Luffy suddenly asked. She looked up at him in confusion as he stared at her breasts. She looked down to see that her nipples were stiff and sticking through her shirt and smiled. They do that when you're cold. She said. Then would you take off your jacket? Luffy asked. They also do that when you're aroused. She said with a seductive grin. Oh, which is it? He asked. She just giggled at his stupidity before hugging him close to her body. Take a guess. She said, not losing that sexy grin. Luffy smiled back before they embraced and kissed. Luffy felt the inside of her mouth with his tongue while his hand slowly crept from her back to her breasts. She moaned inside his mouth as he cupped her left breast with his hand before pinching her nipple. Breaking for air, Luffy effortlessly removed her shirt before taking her left nipple into his mouth, causing Nojiko to bite down on her bottom lip to keep from screaming. Luffy. She thought as the rubber-brained teen squeezed, bit, and played with her breasts. She nearly lost it when his fingers somehow found their way into her pants before rubbing along her slit. He slowly slipped past her panties before slipping a finger inside her, while her kissed her again to muffle her screams of pleasure. Can't take much more. She thought before her eyes widened as Luffy's fingers pinched her clit. Her back arched as she lost herself while her juices flowed down her legs before it finally stopped. She finally got her breathing under control while Luffy removed his hand, which was covered by her fluids. He licked his hand clean before smiling at Nojiko. Tasty? He said as a blush was plastered to his cheeks, causing her to smirk. Glad I taste good. She said. Where'd you learn how to please a woman? Huh? He asked. What do you mean? I just did what felt natural. Natural? She thought before noticing the bulge in his shorts and feeling the heat return almost instantaneously. She gently pushed him back before pulling her pants and panties down. She then faced the wall and bent over, revealing her moist pussy to him. Nojiko? Luffy asked as he felt himself grow hotter at what he saw. Do it? She said with a smile. Luffy looked confused before something inside him seemed to understand as he undid his shorts and let his member out into the open. That's it. She said as he lined himself up with her. Be gentle. She said. Okay. Luffy said as he placed his hands on her ass before he slowly pushed into her until he broke through her hymen. They stayed still as the pain slowly subsided before she gave him the okay to keep going. He slowly pulled out before quickly thrusting back inside. Beep. She yelped before they got into a slow rhythm. Luffy. She panted as she felt him deep inside her. She felt pressure build inside her with each thrust as she looked back at Luffy. Faster. She said, to which Luffy complied and sped up. She bit down on her lip again to keep from screaming in bliss as Luffy continued to fuck her. She nearly screamed when she felt Luffy's hands reach up and grab her breasts. Nojiko, I feel myself getting close. Luffy said. Do I pull out before it happens? Yes. She said as she felt herself close as well while pulling one of Luffy's fingers and putting it between her teeth. I'm borrowing this. She said through clenched teeth. Luffy didn't seem to hear her as he kept going before her walls closed around him. She arched her back as she bit down on Luffy's finger while Luffy pulled out and came onto her back. They both rode their orgasms in silence before they ceased, leaving both exhausted and panting for breath. Nojiko finally let go of his finger, letting it snap into place as she gazed at him. You, Captain, are an animal. She said with a grin. She had him help her clean up the evidence so the others wouldn't know what happened. I am? He asked while he pulled his shorts up. She just shook her head before she clothing herself and heading for the door. I'm heading for the shower. She said before opening the door. She took 2 steps out before turning towards Luffy with a finger to her lips. Don't tell anyone what happened tonight. Okay, Luffy? Okay. He said before heading off to his own bed. In the women's quarters. Nojiko silently walked in and laid in her bed next to Nami before closing her eyes. Ahem. Came a soft whisper. Nojiko opened her eyes to see Nami looking at her. Where were you? I thought you were relieved a while ago. I had to stop Luffy from raiding the fridge again. She said. Is that why you took so long to get back? Nami asked. She stared at Nojiko as she waited for an answer, which she got in the form of a smile stretching across Nojiko's face. Nami looked a little confused before her eyes widened. You didn't. She whispered. You were right. She said. Just a kiss and you want more. Nojiko. Nami sighed in annoyance, but let it drop for the night when they heard Vivi stir a little. Both were silent until she stopped moving around and kept sleeping before looking at Nojiko. We'll talk more in the morning. Alright. Nojiko said before they both closed their eyes and slowly drifted to sleep. Yeah. Nojiko said. I hugged him first after he said he meant it when I asked about if we all were to get sick. He then kept staring at me while blushing. I didn't realize it until our lips touched. After it happened though it was just like you said. Something clicked and we didn't stop. Are you angry? She asked. Nami sighed as she looked out at sea. Actually no. She said. I don't know why though. Really? Nojiko asked. She was surprised to hear that she wasn't angry. Even though they were sisters, anyone would be angry. I feel a lot of things, but none of them are anger. Nami said. And I'm glad. She said with a smile. I can't explain it, but part of me feels okay with sharing him. Nojiko looked at her before smiling at looking out at sea as well. Maybe it's just because he's our captain. Nojiko said. Maybe. Nami said. Captain overboard. Jin suddenly shouted as Luffy flopped around in the sea trying miserably to stay afloat. Luffy had woken up and was running into the cabin to get some food, only for Sanji to kick him out of the cabin so hard he flew over the railing and went into the sea. "Would you do that, bro, Sanji?" Johnny yelled as Jin dragged Luffy back onto the deck. "Nothing," Sanji said with a vein on his forehead. He wasn't gonna tell anyone about the nightmare he had in the middle of the night. Flashback. Sanji was sleeping in his hammock, dreaming sweet fantasies about the women on the crew admiring him and his cooking and saying how much they loved him. He smiled a perverted smile as he continued cooking a huge meal for them all. While cooking, he noticed that their voices were slowly fading until they were gone. He placed the finished meal on a table and wandered around the strangely larger ship as he called out their names. Nami Swaaanvvchwaan, he called out along with the other names. "Where are they?" he asked himself. He wandered the ship before he heard giggling and splashing coming from the other side of a door. "What are they doing?" he asked as he peered through the keyhole. What he saw caused him to drool and sprout hearts in his eyes. Inside the room were Nami, Alvida, Nojiko, Valerie, VV in a hot tub and enjoying themselves. Steam was shooting out of Sanji's ears just as much as the room was making. Sanji couldn't contain the scream of joy when he saw them as they women all stopped and looked at the door. "Who's there?" Valerie asked with her signature laugh. Sounded like Sanji. Alvida cooed. "It is me," Sanji said as he wiggled around like a noodle outside the door. "Room for one more?" "Well, we would, Sanji." Nojiko started. "But the men-women ratio is full," Nami said. "Huh?" Sanji gasped as he looked inside again through the keyhole. He frantically looked around as he tried to see through the steam. "You mean you have other men in there?" "Sorry, Sanji. He was here first," VV said. Sanji looked ready to cry as he now thought of tearing that other man's head off. "Who's in there?" Sanji thought before he saw a pair of hands come out through the steam and began to grope Nojiko. "Ah." Nojiko moaned in pleasure as the hands continued to fondle her. Sanji looked ready to kill whoever it was as the hands pulled her towards the dissipating steam. Sanji's jaw hit the ground in horror as the man finally came into view. "Sorry, Sanji." "Shishy," laughed Luffy. Sanji couldn't seem to turn away from the keyhole as he watched Luffy do so many things to the women of his life before finally being woken up in a cold sweat in the morning with a look of horror on his face. Present. It was a little later on the deck as Sanji, who was still pissed at Luffy, was now grilling him about the food. "I'm only going to ask you once, Luffy," Sanji said. "Where did all the food that I carefully planned to split to feed all of us on this ship till we reached Alabasta disappear to last night?" Luffy looked around while his lips were moved to the side as he sweating a bit. "Wait. All the food's gone?" Nojiko asked before looking at Luffy. "Did you sneak back into the kitchen last night?" "No." Luffy quickly said while Sanji looked ready to kick his ass again. "I left right after you caught me." "Really?" Luffy said. "Where is all the food?" Sanji asked as he squished Luffy's face with his hand. "Really? I don't know." Luffy said. "Why don't I believe you?" Sanji said as he breathed out some smoke. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong place." Nami said as she side-eyed Usopp, Chopper, and Karu who were fishing off the side of the ship while chewing something. "Well, time to catch something to eat," Usopp declared as Sanji slowly strolled over towards them with a smile. "Are the fish biting?" he asked, making them all jump. "Well, not now," Usopp said with a forced smile. Sanji just kept smiling before smashing all their heads together and left them to fall over. "Can't turn my back on you idiots," Sanji said before looking at Nami. "Nami, my love, I beg you. Can we please get a fridge with a lock on it?" "We may need to," Nami said with a frown. "Our lives probably depend on it." "So no food?" Jin asked, just making sure he heard right. "Just great. And it's still a ways off to Alabasta," VV said. "So what now? Just keep fishing and hope for something?" Greg asked. "Looks like it," Valerie said with a sigh as Johnny and Yusaku got some fishing poles and started fishing on the other side as Zoro slept on the deck. "That or train," Luffy said. "Train what?" Nojiko asked. "I could train you guys how to use Haki or the 6 powers," Luffy said. "What are you talking about?" Grace asked. Luffy just smiled before standing up. "Simple. First I need someone to spar with." "Anyone?" he asked with a smile. "I'll do it," Sanji said. He was gonna use this chance to kick Luffy's ass up and down the ship after that nightmare. "Okay. First I'll show you all the 2 forms of Haki that anyone can learn with some training," Luffy said as Jin woke Zoro up. "Luffy's gonna kick Sanji's ass," Jin said to a grumpy Zoro. Zoro smirked as he sat up to watch the cook get his ass handed to him. "Alright, Sanji. Attack any way you want," Luffy said as he closed his eyes. Everyone watched as Sanji ran towards Luffy before jumping. He aimed a kick towards Luffy's head, only for Luffy to move his head slightly and avoid the kick completely. Sanji looked confused before running at him again and aiming a kick at Luffy's chest, only for Luffy to move out of the way again just slightly. Sanji launched kick after kick at Luffy, who not only dodged them all with little movement but kept his eyes closed the whole time. Zoro, Nami, and Usopp smiled while the others watched in awe. "How'd you do that?" Sanji asked as he tried to catch his breath. "I saw it coming with observation haki," Luffy said. "Observation haki?" Alvida asked. "I don't understand it all, but it lets you hear the voice of a person," Luffy said. "Everyone emits a voice. With observation haki, you can hear it and know what's coming in combat or where someone is. It's also helpful when someone's emitting a strong killing intent. So that's how you keep winning in hide and seek?" Chopper asked. "Yes," Luffy said with a grin. "Cheater," most of them said. Luffy only laughed at them before looking back at Sanji. "Hired Sanji?" Luffy asked. "Just getting warmed up," he said before standing up. "Okay. But first, armament haki," he said as he raised a fist before it turned black. "It's black?" VV asked in shock as they were all now watching. "With pure willpower, one can make what acts like a suit of armor around yourself," Luffy said before turning all black and shiny. "It also bypasses the defenses of those with devil fruit powers." "Is that why I couldn't slip out of your grasp back in Louge Town?" Alvida asked. "Yep," Luffy said as he returned to normal before walking towards her. "Can I see your mace?" "Sure. Here," she said as she gave it to him. Luffy took it and raised it up before it turned black with his arm. "With enough training, you can also cover your weapons in it," Luffy said before giving it back to Alvida. "Even things like guns or arrows. So if someone shot you with a pistol while using that haki, then it could kill you?" Yusaku asked. "Yep," Luffy said. "Wow. That's pretty powerful," Jin said. "There's also more," Luffy said before turning to Sanji. "Alright. Let's go." "Alright," he said before running at him and aiming a kick at him. Luffy pulled his hand back while keeping his palm out. Right when Sanji was close enough, Luffy thrust his palm out, causing Sanji to fly back through the air before he fell overboard. "AHH. I hit him too hard," Luffy yelled as they ran over to the side of the ship. "You shitty rubber-brained moron," Sanji yelled as he swam on the surface. They pulled him up before Luffy went on. "Sorry, Sanji. Armament haki can be used like that as well," Luffy said. "So that's haki?" Greg asked. "So all those crazy moves you used at Whiskey Peak were the 6 powers then?" Valerie asked. "Right," Luffy said. "What's that?" Usopp asked as everyone around were now staring with interest. "They're 6 powerful techniques that essentially turn the body into a weapon," Luffy said. "There's Shave, Moonwalk, Finger Pistol, Paper Art, Tempest Kick, and Iron Body." "Wow," Chopper said with wide eyes. "What do they do?" "Simple. First one's Shave," Luffy said before disappearing. Everyone looked around before they saw Luffy on the Mary's head before disappearing again. "Where'd he go?" Yusaku asked before yelling as Luffy appeared right in front of him. "Ah. Shave allows you to move so fast it's like you disappeared," Luffy said. "Watch my feet carefully," Luffy said before moving around left and right a few times. Everyone watched before Zoro spoke up. "You kick the ground 10 times in an instant," he said. "Right," Luffy said. "What do you guys want to see next?" How about Moonwalk?" Nojiko asked. "Alright," Luffy said. He just stood there with a grin before waving at her. "Bye," he said before jumping over the side of the ship. "That idiot." They all yelled as they ran towards the side of the ship, only for some of them to fall back in surprise as Luffy jumped up into the air. He kept going higher and higher until he was now standing up on top of the mast. "Moonwalk allows you to jump in the air," Luffy called down to them before jumping down to the deck alongside them all. "That's amazing," Nami said. "What's Paper Art?" Sanji asked as he ran towards Luffy. He planned to get Luffy with a surprise attack as he aimed a kick at Luffy's chest. Luffy grinned as he bent backwards like a blade of grass in the wind. "It's when your body goes limp and lets you avoid attacks like that," Luffy said before standing up again. "That's 3 of them," Alvida said. "What are the other 3? "Watch. Zoro, you attack me this time," Luffy said. "Alright," Zoro said as he stood up and unsheathed his white sword. "But don't complain if it hurts," he said as he brought his sword down towards Luffy's head. "Iron Body," Luffy said as he raised an arm above his head. Zoro's sword didn't even leave a scratch as it connected with Luffy's arm. "Iron Body is a technique where you toughen your muscles up to the point of mimicking steel. That'd be perfect for defense," Usopp said. "Yeah. Now for some offense," Luffy said. "I need a barrel." "Got one," Jin said as he stood up off the empty barrel he was sitting on. What do you want with it? Tuck it into the air. Luffy said. Alright. Jin said before taking the barrel and flinging it into the air. Watch. Tempest kick. Luffy shouted as he used his legs to shoot out what looked like a flying blade attack at the barrel. Everyone watched as the barrel was cleaved in two before landing back on the deck. A kick so hard that the gust of wind behind it acts like a blade. Everyone watched in awe while Chopper screamed. These techniques were starting to scare him. And the last one? He croaked out. That one I don't use a lot. Luffy said. It's the finger pistol. Let me guess. You shoot someone with your finger? Greg asked with a smirk. Nope. Luffy said as he took a piece of wood from the barrel before and shot a hole in it with his finger. You don't need a gun with this technique. He said as they all saw the perfect hole in the wood before putting more holes in it at blinding speed. Half of them were in awe while the other half felt a bit of fear in them. And those make up the 6 powers. Luffy said. And you want us to train to use them? Nami asked. Yes. Luffy said with a smile. Luffy? Usopp said. Not everyone here has monster strength like you. I know. But you don't need that to do all this stuff. Luffy said. Who taught you all this? Grace asked. I can't say. Luffy said. Zoro listened closely as he knew why. Why not? PV asked. I can't say about the hockey because it would break a promise I made. Luffy said. And what about the 6 powers? Johnny asked. Everyone was waiting for an answer, only to watch Luffy turn a little blue before curling up into a ball. My grandpa taught me. He said in a meek voice. What kind of grandpa does he have? They all thought after seeing him look so scared. So, when do we start? Zoro asked with a grin. Luffy looked at him before grinning. Right now. Nami? Grace mumbled from her where she sat. The crew had trained a bit the first day, but couldn't find the strength to try after that. Valerie was taking a nap, Sanji was inside trying to find anything to cook, and the rest were outside either fishing or just lazing about with empty stomachs. Yeah? Nami said as she lay down on a lawn chair. Have they caught anything yet? She asked. She was sitting next to the mast with her head down as her stomach grumbled. I'll go check. Vivi said as she walked over towards Luffy and Usopp. Have you guys caught Karu? She yelled hysterically as she saw Karu being dangled over the ocean tied to Luffy and Usopp's fishing lines. While Vivi smacked the both of them, she spotted something ahead of them. Everyone on deck was now looking ahead to see a giant cloud of steam ahead of them. What is that? Usopp asked. It's steam from underwater volcanoes. Nami said. Volcanoes are underwater too? Chopper asked. Yes. In around 10,000 years, a new island will form here. Nami said. Wow. 10,000 years. I wonder what it'll be called. Johnny said. We're about to go over it, so why don't we name? Yusaku joked. Yeah? Luffy said. I wasn't serious. Yusaku yelled as they sailed through the steam. Ugh. I can't see anything. Where are you guys? It stinks. Everyone was complaining about it until they sailed through. When they did though, they slowly learned that they picked up a very strange person as well. Luffy and Usopp were both staring at a male ballerina who was hanging off of Karu. Luffy just stared as memories of his old friend came back to him. Akama. Luffy yelled before Mr. 2 fell off Karu and into the ocean. While they fished him out, Greg spotted Mr. 2 before grabbing Grace from near the mast before bolting inside the ship. What's wrong? Grace asked in surprise. Mr. 2's on the ship. Greg said with some sweat on his forehead. Mr. 2 Gray said in loud whisper. SHH. Greg said as he kept an ear on the door to listen. Outside the ship. Mr. 2 was panting as he sat there on the deck soaking wet. I really thought I was gonna die. He said before looking at them all with a big smile. Hey. Thanks so much for saving me. Never thought complete strangers would come to my rescue. I'm in your debt. By the way, would it be possible to ask for a cup of warm soup? No. They all yelled back. We're hungry too. Zoro barked as Mr. 2 looked up at Vivi, who was looking down from the upper rails. Oh wow. Ain't you a cutie? He said before blowing her a kiss. Vivi just shuddered before claiming that he was a weirdo. So you can't swim? Usopp asked as Luffy stared at Mr. 2 with a smile. He hadn't seen him since Impel Down. Indeed. You see, I've eaten a devil fruit and can't swim at all. Mr. 2 said. What kind? Nojiko asked as Mr. 2 stood up. Well, I can't leave until my ship arrives, so let's have some fun. Mr. 2 said. Behold my power. He exclaimed dramatically before smashing his right palm into Luffy's face, sending him flying a bit until he hit the wall. Everyone around stared in shock before some of them looked ready to attack Mr. 2. You bastard. Zoro said before Mr. 2 held up his hands. Hold on you guys. Mr. 2 said in a familiar voice. This is all for fun. he said as they were all now staring in absolute shock. Well, what do you think? He asked as everyone stared at a second Luffy. He's me. Luffy yelled, not growing tired of seeing Mr. Two's power. Mr. Two just laughed as they all stared. And if I touch my face with my left hand, he said before swiping his left hand across his face, returning it to normal. I turn back to me. Behold the power of the clone fruit. The face and voice. They were an exact match. Usopp gasped as Mr. Two touched everyone's face with his right hand. There. Truth be told, I didn't need to smack you like that. He said. Now watch, he said as he kept shifting through the crew's faces. If I touch you change with my right hand, change I can turn into change an exact copy of you. He said as Nami before flashing a few of them. The body too. He said as some of them stared in awe before Nami punched him. Ouch. Quit that. She yelled as Nojiko snickered. Stop laughing. You're a very strange man. Alvida said. I'm not strange. Mr. Two mumbled from where he lay on the ground before jumping up and posing. I'm an Akama. He declared. Luffy just laughed while everyone else gave him strange looks. Sadly, that is all I can show you. He said before Usopp, Chopper, and Luffy cheered for an encore, which he gladly did as he began to change into other faces. As he did, Vivi gasped as he changed into one she recognized. Soon, all four were dancing around like idiots, while some of the others either stared on in disbelief or laughed. Hey, is that your ship? Jin asked as he pointed towards an incoming ship. It is. Mr. Two exclaimed happily. It seems, my friends, that we must part. He said as the three others groaned in sadness. But fear not everyone. Even though we part ways here our friendship shall never die. He said with tears in his eyes before jumping over onto his ship. Let's go everyone. Yes sir, Mr. Two. Bone Clay. His men said before sailing off. Mr. Two. Usopp shouted as they all looked on in shock. That guy was with Baroque Works. Nojiko said in shock as they watched the enemy ship sail away. That was Mr. Two. Vivi yelled. Then why didn't you tell us big sis? Johnny and Yasaku yelled. I've never met Mr. Two or the Mr. One pair before. She said as she lowered her head in apology. All I heard were rumors that he speaks, wears, and lives like an Akama. How could you not notice? Most of them said in disbelief. One of those faces he showered earlier, she said while trembling. Was my father's face. What kind of horrors will he commit with my father's face? If he can imitate a king, he can cause some serious problems. Zoro said. I can't believe we let a bad guy get away. Usopp said as he crossed his arms. He was our enemy? Chopper asked. And he has almost all of our faces. Nami said. Which means it'll be quite troublesome if he finds out we're the enemy. Alvida said as the door to the inside of the ship opened up. Is he gone? Greg asked. Where have you two been? Jin asked as Greg and Grace walked out onto the deck. We're traitors, remember? Greg said. If he had seen us, there may have been a good chance he'd kill us. He can get scary when he's mad. Grace said with some sweat on her forehead. Actually, it's a good thing we met him. Zoro said with a grin. Now we can plan some countermeasures. Some time later. Mr. Two was here, Valerie shrieked. After she had woken up, Greg and Grace informed her of their encounter with him. Yeah. He didn't see us though. Grace said. That's good. Valerie sighed in relief before a giant sea cat surfaced next to them. Ah. Sea monster. Usopp and Chopper cried out. Everyone stopped and looked at it. A sea cat. Vivi yelled before Luffy, Jin, Zoro, Sanji, and looked at it with extreme hunger in their eyes. Alright. Food. Luffy yelled. About time we caught something. Jin said. Our first meal in 4 days. Zoro said as he went for his swords while the sea cat slowly backed away in fear. Don't let it get away. Sanji yelled. Stop. Vivi shrieked as she smashed all their heads against the rails while the sea cat swam away. Sea cats are sacred animals in Alabasta. So many strange creatures. Chopper said. If you're SCSC scared of stuff like that, then you're ST still a KKK kid. Usopp stuttered from where he shivered on the deck before standing up and telling Chopper a story about how he went up against sea kings before. Sorry guys. You'll be able to eat soon. Vivi said. Yes. Luffy shouted. Are we close to Alabasta yet? Nojiko Iskedon. The wind and climate have stabilized. Nami said. Yes. We've entered the Alabasta climate zone. The sea cat is also proof that we're close. Vivi said. And that is more proof that we're close. Zoro said with a smirk. Everyone looked to see a dozen or so ships with the Baroque Work symbol on them. Look at all those ships. Luffy said as everyone gathered around to look at them. The billions. Valerie said. They work under the officer agents of Baroque Works. Like you guys? Alvida asked. Not us. Not anymore. Gray said as they all began to argue about what to do. They all sailed away and got away from them before they began Zoro's plan. "Alright everyone. Tie them on tight," he said as they all began to tie white clothes to their left wrists. "I see," Vivi said. "Now we don't have to doubt each other if we can see these," Nami said. "Great idea big bro," Johnny and Yasaku said. "So does he really look like us? This clone guy?" Sanji asked. "He didn't look like us. He is us," Usopp explained. "You should have seen him. He was a fun guy." "I've no interest in Akamas," Sanji said. "Now that we know he's our enemy, we can't let our guards down," Zoro said. "What should I do?" Chopper asked. "Do what you can do. Nothing else," Usopp said. "If you can't beat run. Just do your very best. That's what you keep telling yourself," Sanji said as he tied a cloth to Karu's left wing. "What I can do okay," Chopper said. "And remember guys," Zoro said as he untied his rope to reveal a black X under it. "If you suspect that anyone is lying, ask them to show this mark under the cloth. If they can't, it's Mr. 2. "That's a smart idea," Sanji said. "No way Mosshead could do that. You must be Mr. 2. "Don't make me kill you," Zoro barked. "It's Zoro," Usopp said in relief. "We're near the harbor. Let's hide the ship to the west," Nami said. "Okay. No matter what happens, remember this," he said as everyone held out their left arms in a circle. "This mark on our arms is the proof of our friendship. Now, let's go find a restaurant." "I second that," Jin said. "Both of you idiots shut up," Nami shouted as they all began to argue. Vivi just watched them all as she held her arm close to her and smiled. Soon they anchored their ship before Luffy took off in search of food. "Get back here, you idiot," Greg shouted. "He doesn't think, does he?" Grace asked. "Nope." They all answered before they spotted another ship nearby. "That's Mr. 3's ship," Vivi said. "Mr. 3?" Nami said in surprise. "It can only move with the power of the wax fruit," Vivi said as Grace gulped. "Mr. 3. She mumbled. She couldn't help but feel nervous. She knew that Mr. 3 would not like seeing a traitor and would not hesitate to do away with her. She kept staring before she felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up. "Don't worry Grace," Usopp said. "He's right," Sanji said. "If that weirdo tries to hurt a little lady, he'll get the ass kicking of his life," Sanji said. She looked around to see everyone smiling and talking before a smile crept onto her face. "Yeah. You're right. Thanks guys," she said. "What should we do about Luffy?" Vivi asked. "Nanohana's a big town." "Don't worry about Luffy Vivi-chan," Sanji said. "Just follow the noise and we'll find him. That's for sure," Usopp said as some of them laughed. "Honestly," Nami sighed. "Can't he be more worried? He's got a bounty on his head that's sure to attract bounty hunters," Nami said. "He's fine," Zoro said. "Now let's get some food," he said before they all split up to find supplies. But Zoro, Jin, Yasaku, and Johnny. The four of them were wandering the town while in disguise, looking for Luffy and some supplies. "Excuse me ma'am. Have you seen a man wearing a straw hat?" someone asked. That got the four straw hats' attention as they all looked to see a man asking an old woman about Luffy. "Who's that guy?" Jin whispered as Zoro's eyes widened. "Shit," he said. "Look at his back." They all did and turned a little blue to see the symbol of the Whitebeard pirates tattooed on the man's back. "He's a Whitebeard pirate." "Whitebeard?" Johnny and Yasaku gasped. "They call him the strongest man in the world," Jin said as the man walked off. "Yeah. And he's looking for Luffy," Zoro said. "What does he want with big bro Luffy?" Yasaku asked. "Hey, you don't think Luffy pissed off the Whitebeard pirates, do you?" Jin asked. "No way," Johnny said with a laugh. "Big bro wouldn't do something that stupid," he said. "Right." Everyone grew deathly quiet at that as sweat began to pour down their faces. They suddenly ran off in search for their captain. "What did that moron do?" they all mentally shrieked. Back at the ship. All the women had stayed behind while the men went off for the supplies. While they were talking, Grace was painting the wall they were hiding behind to take her mind off of Mr. 3. "You worried?" Valerie asked her as she sat next to her. "A little," Grace said. "Don't worry. You've seen Luffy fight him before. He's more than a match for Mr. 3. Valerie said with a laugh. "Yeah. But I'm still worried," Grace said. "How long will it take for them to get supplies?" Nojiko asked. "Nanohana has everything we need to cross the desert," Vivi said as Jin came over and hid next to them all. "That was fast," Alvida said before noticing that Jin was panting. "What's wrong with you?" "Been running looking for Luffy," Jin asked. "But I thought you all said Luffy would be okay," Vivi said. "But the locals and Baroque works maybe," Jin said. But we just saw a Whitebeard pirate who's looking for him. Whitebeard? They all said in shock. You mean the Whitebeard pirates? He bore the symbol of the Whitebeard pirates on his back. Jin said. There's no mistaking that. Why would a pirate from the Whitebeards look for Luffy? Valerie asked. Maybe he pissed Whitebeard off. Alvida said. That's what we think. Jin said as Nami slapped her forehead. Luffy, you idiot. She said as the others came back with supplies. Soon, they were all in desert clothing. The men and Grace were all in long robes, while the women were all in belly dancer outfits. Sanji. Vivi said as Nami and Alvida were smiling at the clothes. I asked for clothing. You like them? He asked in love mood. Well, they are nice. She said. But we needed clothing to blend in within country. Belly dancers are citizens too. He said. But it's not proper clothing for crossing the desert. She said. If it gets too hot, I'll carry you. He said. Leave him be. He's not listening. No, Jiko said as Valerie laughed. I'm not complaining. Alvida said as she swayed her hips a bit, which started driving Sanji crazy. While they were talking, Valerie went over towards Grace. Something wrong? She asked as Grace was staring at her and the other women before looking at herself. Nothing. She mumbled. Truth was, she was a little jealous of the others. Valerie just looked at her before giving off a light laugh. You said so yourself. You're almost 14. You'll grow. She said. Shut up. Grace mumbled. What's wrong, reindeer bro? Johnny asked as Chopper lay on the ground while covering his blue nose with his hooves. My nose hurts. Chopper said. It must be the perfume. Vivi said. Perfume? Chopper said. Yes. Nanohana is famous for perfume. She said. Like this? Nami said as she sprayed some on herself. Stop it. Chopper cried out before Vivi began explaining where they were going. Get down. Zoro said before grabbing her and having them all hide. They all peeked out to see the Marines chasing someone. The Marines? What are they doing here? It looks like they're chasing someone. No, Jiko said before they saw who it was and they all nearly collapsed. Not you, Luffy. They shouted before Luffy ran at them. Guys. He shouted. Don't run this way. Some of them shouted back. What did that idiot do? Some of them thought. Earlier in a restaurant. The crowd was forming around a restaurant as some of them were talking about how a customer suddenly died in the middle of his meal. They began saying how it was a spider that did it before the man suddenly rose up out of his food, stunning them all, while he had a dazed look in his eyes as he looked around in confusion. Huh? He said as a woman asked if he was alright, only to run away after he used her skirt to wipe his face. Ugh. Man, I fell asleep. He said before going back to his meal. You fell asleep. Everyone shouted. And yet he goes right back to eating. What's wrong with all of you? He asked. We were worried about you. They shouted. You hire entertainers or something? He asked the owner. No, but I'm glad you're okay. He said with a smile before the man fell asleep again. Don't fall asleep. They all shouted as he snored in his food. He woke up again before looking at the owner and pulling out Luffy's wanted poster. By the way, you seen this guy? He asked the owner before Smoker walked in. Pretty brazen of you to eat in public. He said as everyone looked at him. Tell me, what does the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard pirates want in this country? Well, pork is the ace. Whitebeard. Everyone shrieked as they all stared at the man. Simple. I'm looking for my little brother. Ace said with a smile. Luffy was running around town as he followed his nose towards the smell of food. Ugh. This town stinks. Where's the food? He asked before spotting the restaurant a good distance ahead before drooling. There's the res, he said before his voice died in his throat and he slowly stopped running. He just stared ahead with widened eyes as he felt his breath catch in his chest. His hockey picked up on 2 people in the restaurant. One he remembered from Louge Town and the other was someone he hadn't seen in so long. His eyes began to water while his body trembled as memories began to flood his mind as he muttered in a low and broken voice. Ace. In the restaurant. So, what should I do? Ace asked in a confident tone. Sit there and let me arrest you. Smoker said. Wrong answer. Ace said. HMPH. Actually, I'm not here for you. Smoker said. I'm looking for someone else. Well then why not let me go? Ace asked with a smile. Can't do that. Smoker said as he turned his right arm into smoke. So long as you're a pirate and I'm a marine. Ace just chuckled before grinning at Smoker. You sir need to relax. Ace said. Both just stared at each other before a voice could be heard in the distance and getting closer. Yeah. Luffy screamed as he rocketed into the restaurant and straight into Smoker's back. Ah. Smoker yelled as Ace's eyes bugged a bit out of his head. Everything seemed to go in slow motion before Luffy and Smoker smashed into Ace, sending both of them flying through several walls and out into a busy street while Luffy landed on his feet. Ace. Luffy yelled as he looked around hysterically with tears rolling down his face as he smiled. He kept looking around until the smile fell off his face when he couldn't find Ace, while everyone else in the restaurant just stood there gaping at him. Huh? I know I sensed Ace here. Luffy mumbled to himself before staring at the ground with a sad look on his face. He didn't even hear his stomach grumble for food as he looked at the ground. I know I meet Ace again in Alabasta, maybe I'm just too eager to see him again. Luffy thought. Hey kid? The owner asked, snapping Luffy out of his thoughts. You might wanna. Dude please. Luffy said as he quickly sat on a stool. Everyone just stared at him before the owner got him a few plates of food. In the street. The crowd was forming around Ace and Smoker as both of them were slowly waking up. What was that? Ace muttered in irritation as Smoker lit 2 cigars. Ace began walking back through the holes in the buildings, bowing respectfully and apologizing to various people for the damage before walking back to the restaurant. Smoker followed him as he too wanted to find the one who hit him. Both saw who it was before a smile appeared on Ace's face and a scowl on Smoker's. Hey Lou. Straw Hat. Smoker yelled as he shoved Ace's face into the dirt. Luffy just kept eating as Smoker approached him. So, you've arrived in Alabasta as well. Smoker said. Luffy just kept eating as he stared at Smoker. Stop eating. Luffy kept shoveling food in his face as he stared at Smoker as he swallowed all his food before smiling. Hey Smokey. When did you get here? He asked. Sit down and eat. The food's great. He said with a grin, causing Smoker to glare at him with narrowed eyes. You arrogant little. Hold that thought. Luffy yelled before shoving all the food into his mouth, stretching his cheeks out. Thanks for the food. He mumbled with a bow before sprinting out the door. Get back here. Smoker yelled as he gave chase. Ace slowly got to his feet before running out the door as well. Hey Luffy. Wait up. It's me. Ace yelled as the owner stared in stunned disbelief. Dine and dash. He said. With Luffy. Luffy was still running through the town before he swallowed his food as Smoker kept on chasing him. Tashigi. Smoker yelled as he spotted Tashigi talking with some other marines. Yes Captain Smoker. Do you need a towel or something? She asked. Patch him. It's Straw Hat Luffy. He ordered. Straw Hat. She gasped before unsheathing her sword and swinging at Luffy, who effortlessly jumped out of danger onto the rooftops. Smoker followed Luffy onto the rooftops before continuing his chase. Gather the men and have them hunt down and capture Straw Hat's crew. Smoker ordered. Yes sir. She said as she left to carry out his orders while he gave chase. Luffy kept on running as Smoker kept sending out attack after attack. With Luffy's friends. Luffy. Lose the Marines, then join us. Zoro yelled. There's the rest of his crew. One of the Marines yelled. What now? Usopp yelled. We run. That's what. Nami said. Back to the ship. VV said as everyone started grabbing their stuff. Capture them. A Marine yelled. Move it. Smoker yelled before throwing out a smoky punch. White blow. Heat haze. Yelled a voice as a wall of fire blocked Smoker's punch. Everyone was now staring at the giant ball of fire as it slowly revealed a grinning man. Forget it. You may be smoke, but I'm fire. A fight between us would be pointless. He said. Everyone was stunned as they watched a fire dance across the man's body. It's that white-beard pirate from before. Yasaku yelled. He's got devil fruit powers, Zoro said. What does he want? Alvita said as the rest also asked questions, none of which were heard by Luffy as the world around him seemed to disappear, leaving only Ace in his view. Ace? Luffy mumbled weakly as memories from when they were kids to when Ace was killed in front of him filled Luffy's mind. Is that you? He asked. Ace only looked back with a grin. You never change, Luffy. He said before looking at the Marines. I'll hold these guys off. Get out of here. Go. Let's go. Greg yelled as they all ran. Who is that guy Luffy? Usopp asked as they ran. Luffy. Usopp said as he looked back when Luffy didn't answer. Luffy. What are you doing? He yelled when he saw that Luffy hadn't budged an inch. Everyone looked back to see this as well. I got him. Zoro yelled as he ran back to Luffy. Luffy. Come on. We got it, he said before he saw tears flowing down Luffy's blank face. He remembered what Luffy said before and understood why Luffy was crying before grabbing his arm and dragging him away towards the others. Run. Zoro yelled as he caught up with them all. What's wrong with you, Luffy? Usopp yelled as he looked back at Luffy, who hadn't taken his eyes off of Ace. Talk later. Run now. Zoro yelled before they all saw a huge cloud of smoke and fire float into the sky. Earlier with Ace and Smoker. Ace stood between the Marines and the Straw Hats. Why are you helping them? Smoker asked. Ace just chuckled with a grin on his face. Having a dumb little brother makes a big brother worry. Ace said as the fire around him started to grow. Brother? Smoker asked. You two are? He said before he narrowed his eyes. Move it. No way. Ace said both of them erupted into smoke and fire. But the Straw Hats. Luffy? Nami yelled before slapping him. He shook his head before looking at her as everyone else stared at Ace and Smoker's fight. Who is that guy? That's Ace. Luffy said as he turned to the fight. He's my big brother. That got all of their attention. Brother? They all yelled. So he grew up with you and Sabo? Nojiko asked. Yeah. Luffy said as he began to tear up again. It's been a long time since I've seen him. Everyone watched him tear up before the smoke and fire began to billow out in everything direction. Anyway, let's talk more of the ship. Nami said before they all ran for it, with Luffy running backwards with a barrel of water. The path splits. Everyone, go left. Nami yelled. Anything you say, Nami SWAN Sanji said. Shut up crap cook. Zoro yelled as the Straw Hats went left and Luffy went to his left, which was the other way. He kept on running until he got into an alleyway before placing the water barrel down. But the Straw Hats. Everyone had made it to the ship before Nami told them to stow everything and cast off. We're leaving already Vivi? Chopper asked. Yes. She said. We only stopped here to gather supplies for our journey. Next stop is Aramalu. The city of green. Aramalu? Chopper asked in confusion before everyone pulled up the anchor and unfurled the sails. Everyone was ready but stopped when it slowly dawned on them all. Ugh eyes. Where's Luffy? Jin asked. Big bro Luffy's not here. Johnny said. That dumbus. Zoro yelled. Ace. Luffy said before dropping to his hands and knees as the tears flowed down his face. Ace. He screamed out before sobbing. He knew that he'd see Ace again, but to see him right in front of him he just couldn't control himself anymore as he cried his heart out. Hey now, said Ace as he looked down at Luffy from atop a building. Didn't I tell you before that real men don't cry? Luffy looked up to see Ace smiling down at him before jumping down to him. Still a crybaby, huh? Hey Ace. Luffy said in a broken voice as the tears flowed even faster down his face. The smile on Ace's face fell into a frown as he looked at Luffy. Something's not right. He thought. Luffy's never cried this much not since, but before he could finish that thought, he found himself in a bone-breaking hug. Huh? He said as he looked down at Luffy hugging him. Ace it's really you? Luffy sobbed. Ace smiled before returning the hug. It's only been 3 years Luffy. Ace said as he pulled Luffy away. I didn't think you'd miss me that much. Luffy didn't seem to hear him as he muttered something. Something that got Ace's attention. You're alive. He said. Of course I am. Don't you remember? I promised you that I wouldn't die. Ace said with a smile. Luffy's reaction wasn't what he expected however as Luffy just screamed out in sadness. Come on Luffy. Ace said as Luffy just sniffled. Luffy looked at Ace again sobbing again and hugging him. Nothing Ace said was getting Luffy to stop crying, so he did the only thing he could think of that would work. He raised his fist before bringing it down onto Luffy's head. Enough. He yelled as Luffy's head went crashing into the dirt, which resulted in his head getting stuck and the crying to stop. Jeez. I told you I don't like crybabies. He said as Luffy struggled to get his head out of the ground. After a hard tug, his head popped out of the ground before it snapped back, flinging his body backwards until he fell on his ass. You done crying now? He asked. Sorry. Luffy said as he just sat on the ground with a look of pain and sadness in his eyes. Ace sat down as well before he sighed. Alright Luffy. What's wrong? He asked. Luffy said. The only other time you ever cried like that was back on our home island. Ace said. Oh it's nothing. Luffy said. Ace just raised an eyebrow before painfully pulling Luffy's cheek. Ow. Liar. Tell me what's wrong Luffy. Ace said as he pulled on the cheek. I can't. Luffy said. What do you mean you can't? Ace said as he let go of Luffy's cheek. I made a promise to a friend. Luffy said. And if I told you, I'd be breaking that promise. Ace just stared at Luffy before sighing. If there was one thing he knew about Luffy, it was that Luffy would never spill a friend's secret. Alright. He said before smiling as he pulled a canteen of water out and drank some of it. Still, it's good to see you Luffy. You too. Luffy said with a smile. If only Ace knew how true that was to Luffy. I heard my crew say you were a Whitebeard pirate. Yep. Ace said as he turned around to show him the mark on his back. This tattoo here is our mark and my pride. Ace said before facing Luffy and asking him, hey Luffy, won't you and your crew join the Whitebeard pirates? Nope. Luffy said without a second thought. Ace only smiled at him. Didn't think so. Ace said with a laugh. Shame really. Whitebeard's the greatest pirate I know. That's why I'm gonna help him become king of the pirates, Luffy. Okay. Luffy said with a grin. I'll just fight him then since I'm the one who's gonna be king of the pirates. He said before he remembered that he wouldn't get the chance since Whitebeard was killed in the war. Both then grabbed their things as they began walking before Luffy took a huge swallow of water from his barrel. On the marine ship. Where'd all those marines go? Mr. 11 asked himself. Ah, who cares? Just gotta get free before they come back. Mr. 11. Someone said. Mr. 11 looked up to see a few people looking down at him. Hello. If you know my codename, you must be with Baroque Works. Hurry and untie me millions. Mr. 11 said. You're half right. One of them said. We are Baroque Works, but we're billions. Said the fat one. We're next in line to become number agents should anything happen to one of you guys. You must be one pathetic agent to have been captured by the Marines. Said the third guy. Can we talk later? Like when I'm out of here? Mr. 11 asked. One of the men grinned as he pointed a gun at him. Oh, you're out alright. Out of Baroque Works and out of the land of the living. He said. Mr. 11 stared up in horror as he told him that a billions can fill in available as a huge man came out of nowhere. And yours is about to become available. He said. No. Wait. Stop. Mr. 11 begged before a gunshot was heard. All four of them jumped off the boat as another billions came running towards them. Big news. He panted. Fire Fist Ace is in town. Fire Fist Ace. The 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. They asked before the big man grinned. If we kill Fire Fist Ace, a seat as a number agent is in the bag. He said. With Luffy and Ace. Okay Luffy. Let's go find your friend before the Marines do. Ace said as they kept walking. Any ideas where they are? With the ship. Luffy said. Okay. Which way is that? Ace asked. Luffy just closed his eyes for a moment before pointing out west. That way. He said. That way. Ace said as he looked on. Out west huh? If you say so. He said before grinning. Looks like you've matured a bit since I last saw you Luffy. You have no idea. Luffy mumbled. What? Ace asked. Nothing. Luffy said with a laugh. Ace just chuckled as well before they kept on walking and talking. So, you ate a devil fruit too? Yep. The flame fruit. Ace said as he held up his hand as flames danced on his fingers. So Luffy, tell me about your crew. What are they like? Ace asked. Where do I start? Luffy said as he stared off in thought. I've got a big group on my ship. I saw that earlier. Ace said. How about we wait until we meet them at your ship? Alright. Luffy said with a grin. I can't wait to introduce you to them all. I can't wait to meet them. Ace said. I thought your pirate crew would be a bit smaller. Guess I was wrong. He said with a laugh. And I plan to get more. Luffy said. Though I'm still looking for a musician. He said as he thought about Brook. Hey, the papers say you attacked the royal family of Go Kingdom. Ace suddenly said. Is that true? Nah. Luffy said with a grin. I heard there was a big banquet there, so I crashed the party, stole the food, and ran. He said. He didn't mention how they bad-mouthed Sabo, knowing that Ace would go back there and burn the whole place to the ground for insulting their brother like he was nothing. Ha. That definitely sounds more your style Luffy. Ace said before laughing. Stop right there Fire Fist. Someone said as a large number of billions started appearing and surrounded the both of them. You're surrounded Ace. Said the leader of the group. Your head is mine, along with a promotion. Get ready to die. He said before some of the others noticed Luffy was there. A man with a 48 million berry bounty. This is my lucky day. Said the leader as Luffy and Ace walked right past him. Let's go find your friends. Ace said. Right. Luffy said as they kept walking. Hey you. Get back here. Kill them. Shouted the leader. Luffy and Ace just smiled before they both went to town on the billions. Back at the ship. The rest of Luffy's crew sailed away to avoid getting caught by the Marines. Is it really okay to sail off without Luffy? Chopper asked. The Marines will look around the harbor first for our ship. Nami said. We have to hide the ship first. I know of a secluded cove up ahead. Vivi said. We can anchor the ship there. So we lay low, wait for the heat to wear off, then find Luffy. Sanji said. Everyone agreed before they began to argue about Luffy's stupidity. Hey guys. Why was Luffy crying earlier? Chopper suddenly asked. Everyone stopped talking and looked at each other as they thought about it. I don't know why. Nami said as she looked down. Something tells me that doesn't usually happen. Greg said. You'd be right. No Jiko said. What troubles me is the look on Luffy's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he hadn't seen Ace in a while. Usopp said. Everyone was slowly guessing what happened. Zoro was the only one who was silent as he stared out at the island and thought. Hey Mosshead. Sanji said. You suddenly grew quiet. Zoro just side-eyed him before looking back at the island. You know something, don't you? He said. Everyone was now looking at Zoro as he looked back at them all. Is that true, big bro? Johnny asked. You know what's wrong with big bro Luffy? Yusaku asked. Zoro just eyed each of them before closing his eyes. You do know something. Nami said. What's going on, Zoro? She demanded. Is Luffy sick? Chopper asked in worry. Mr. Bushido? VV said as Zoro remained quiet. It's not my place to say. Zoro finally said. Some of them looked ready to keep pressing him for answers, but Nami stopped them with a groan. Oh great. Nami said while looking through a pair of binoculars towards the island. There's Luffy. She said as Luffy stretched his arm over before rocketing onto the ship, knocking over Sanji and Chopper. He's back. Nami said in a bored tone. We noticed. Some of them said as Luffy apologized to Sanji and Chopper before Sanji began to yell at Luffy. Honestly, Luffy. Nami said. Do you know what kind of trouble you've put us through? She asked. My bad. Luffy said as he looked up at her. Nice outfit. He said. She just looked out at the sea so no one could see her blush. Whatever. She said. Where's Ace? Jin asked as Luffy looked out over the side of the ship. Did you ditch him? Zoro asked. Kind of. Luffy said before relaxing a gaze at the railing. Don't worry. Ace is strong. How strong? Chopper asked. When we were kids, he always kicked my ass. Even before he ate the flame fruit. The flesh and blood guy beat you? Nami asked in disbelief. I find that hard to believe. Alvida said. You couldn't beat him, big bro, Johnny and Yusaku asked. Nope. Luffy said. Every time we fought, he'd kick my ass. But that was when we were kids. I could totally kick his ass now. Luffy said before laughing. Whose ass can you kick? Ace yelled before landing on the railing as Luffy fell on his butt and looked up at Ace. Hey, Ace. He said with a huge grin. This is my crew. He said before standing up. Nice to meet you all. Ace said before he bowed his head at them. Thanks for taking care of my little brother. I know he can be a handful. Not at all. They said before bowing at Ace. Don't lie. Ace said with a smile. I know my little brother. He's definitely a handful, isn't he? Not really. They said. You guys are okay. Ace said. Come on in. Sanji said as he held up an unlit cigarette. I'll make you some tea. That's nice, but I don't want to impose. Ace said before lighting Sanji's cigarette with his finger. He's acts totally different from Luffy. No, Jiko said as they all stared at Ace. Are we sure they're brothers? Usopp asked. He's polite while he's a total airhead. Grace said. And this guy kicked our captain's ass all the time? Nami asked. They just can't be brothers. Jin said. I don't see it. Johnny and Yusaku said. Neither do I. Zoro said. I wish I had a nice brother. Chopper said. I wish I had a nice captain. Sanji said. I bet he doesn't get lost like our captain. Alvida said. Maybe we can swap Luffy for this guy. Valerie said with a laugh. Keep on dreaming, Val. Greg said. Everyone. VV said before looking at Ace. They're all joking. She said with a smile. Aren't they a riot? Luffy asked with a grin and a laugh as 5 billion ships sailed towards them. Them again? Those are the billions. VV said in surprise. I got this. Ace said as he jumped into his boat, detached it from the rope and sailed off towards them using his flame fruit powers. What's he doing? Nami yelled. He's gonna fight them all on his own. Usopp asked. I wouldn't worry. Zoro said as he crossed his arms and looked on with a bored look. Not just anyone gets to be 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. And he was proven right as Ace jumped over all 5 ships while his striker dove under the water. Ace was over the last ship before he fell towards the water and landed on his striker as it resurfaced before his fist burst into flames. Fire fist. He cried out as he threw a huge wave of fire at the ships, leaving all 5 of them nothing but charred splinters floating in the sea. Are you fucking serious? Usopp yelled out as they all looked on in shock. Luffy smiled while Ace tilted his hat up with a flaming finger before smirking. Back with Smoker and the Marines. Smoker and Tashigi were discussing about the Straw Hats not being in Nanohana, along with Smoker seeing Vivi with the Straw Hats. Tashigi thought that she was abducted for a ransom, while Smoker thought otherwise as he saw her willingly go with him. Something very strange is happening. Smoker said. Can't figure out what though. Captain Smoker. Another Marine said as he approached them before saluting. Bad news, sir. Mr. 11 was killed on board while we were all looking for the Straw Hats, which we haven't found yet. Cancel the search. I've got a good idea where they're going. Smoker said. I'm pretty sure he's going after Crocodile. He said. Tashigi argued about this as Crocodile is one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Smoker stated his disgust of the 7 warlords before claiming Crocodile as the worst. But isn't he our ally? Tashing asked. Crocodile may have fooled the higher-ups, but not me. Smoker said. If they think approving him and giving him freedom will make him obey, they're dead wrong. Remember this very well to Shiggy. Once a pirate, always a pirate no matter what. Wherever Crocodile is, Straw Hat will be there, along with the answers as to what's happening here. He won't escape from me this time. Back with Luffy's crew. Luffy and his friends were celebrating before Luffy asked Ace to join them. Sorry Luffy, but I'm here on business. Ace said. I'm looking for a pirate named Blackbeard. Luffy's eye twitched at that guy's name as some of them other crew members remembered Blackbeard's name from Drum Island. He used to be one of my subordinates until he committed an unforgivable sin on our ship. He killed a crewmate, then jumped ship. I'm his commander, so I'm the one who must deal with him. So that's why you're here? Usopp said. I've heard that Blackbeard's been spotted in Alabasta in a place called Yuba, so that's where I gotta go. Ace said. That's where we're going too. Right, VV? Nami said. Right. VV said before bringing out a map and pointing to where they docked the ship and where Yuba was. Well what do you know? Ace said. Mind if I join you guys? Ace asked. I'll follow the ladies here Anywhere Sanji said as he wiggled around like a noodle. How about off a cliff? Zoro said. What did you say? Sanji snarled. Knock it off. Nami yelled. Well Ace, looks like you'll be joining us for a little while. It's great to have you on board Ace. Usopp said. Welcome big bro Ace. Johnny and Yasaku yelled. This is gonna be a blast. Luffy said as he raised his mug. To Ace. Cheers. They all yelled as they clinked their mugs together and drunk. Hey Luffy, now that we have a breather away from all those guys chazzing us, how about some introductions? I'll go first. Ace said before looking at Luffy's crew. Nice to meet you all. My name is Portas D. Ace. Luffy's older brother and 2nd Division commander. He said before bowing his head. Nice to meet you. They all said before bowing as well before Luffy started introducing his crew. This is Zoro. He's my first mate and is aiming to be the world's greatest swordsman. Nice to meet you. Zoro said as they shook hands before Luffy moved on. These two behind him are Johnny and Yasaku. They're swordsmen too who look up to Zoro and wanna be badass swordsmen like Zoro as well. A bro of Luffy's is a bro of ours. They said in unison as they shook each of Ace's hands. This is Nami and her big sister Nojiko. Nami's our navigator who loves money and tangerines. She also draws maps. And Nojiko here is helping her out. It's nice to meet you Ace. Nojiko said as they shook hands. It's still strange to think you two are brothers. Nami said. Both she and Ace smiled as they shook hands. It's strange, but true. Ace said. This guy here is Chopper. He's a reindeer who's also a doctor who also transforms into 7 different forms. Isn't that awesome? Luffy exclaimed. That does sound awesome. Ace said. You two complimenting me like isn't going to make me happy, so shut up you bastards Chopper said as he danced around. Not good at hiding his emotions, is he? Ace asked. They all just laughed before Luffy moved on. This is Sanji. He's our cook. He makes amazing food. Is that all I am to you Luffy? Sanji asked in irritation before looking at Ace with a small smile. Still, he's right about me making great food. He also forgot to mention that you're a lovesick pervert. Zoro said. You wanna die mosshead? Sanji roared. Calm down. Ace said as he held his hands up. I'll have to try your food sometime. Ace said as they shook hands. Anytime you need a light, just ask. I'll remember that. Sanji said as he calmed down before Luffy continued. This is Alvida. She ate the smooth fruit and likes to hit people with her iron mace. Smooth? Ace asked. Watch. She said from her seat on the railing. Sanji, would you be a dear and help me up? She asked as she held out her hand. Of course Alvida Chwan Sanji said as he spun around towards her and took her hand. He tried to help her to her feet, only for his hand to slip before he fell face first onto the deck. Oops. Alvida said as the others all laughed. Sorry, Sanji. Alvida cooed. Alvida. Sanji said as blood dripped from his injured nose. You're so beautiful when you're toying with people. I see what you mean. Ace said as Luffy went on. This is Vivi. She's the princess of Alabasta. And that's her duck Karu. The princess? Ace asked in shock. What's a princess doing on a pirate ship? It's a long story. She said before holding her hand out. It's nice to meet you Ace. It's nice to meet you too. Ace said as they shook hands as Karu happily quacked while Luffy stood next to Valerie. This is Valerie. She's a chocolatier. Nice to meet you. She said as they shook hands. Nice to meet you too. A chocolatier huh? Ace said. She nodded before Ace lifted her off the ground with one hand. Wow, you're light. Ace said. I ate the kilo fruit. She said as she did a one-handed handstand on his hand. I can change my weight from 1 to 10,000 kilos. She said before increasing her weight and falling into Ace's arms bridal style. Oof. Ace grunted as he struggled to keep them both from falling. Okay, I get it. He groaned. Hiya ha ha ha. She laughed before jumping out of his arms. This is Jin. He always looks like he needs sleep and is a strong fighter. Nice to meet you. He said with a small smile. Same here. Ace said as they shook hands. This is Grace. She want to be a world-famous artist. Luffy said. She can also make you laugh, cry, or drink tea with her paint. An artist huh? Ace asked as he bent down to her eye level. Laugh, cry, or drink tea. Grace only smiled before she took her palette and brush before slapping a yellow, blue, and green mark on Usopp, Jin, and Luffy. Colors trap. Laughing yellow, sadness blue, and soothing green. Ahahahaha. Jin laughed as he fell to the ground and began to laugh hysterically. They all looked at him, thinking it looked a little off to see a serious man like Jin laugh like that. Gee, get this pee paint off me. He said through his laughing. Grace. You'll pay for this. Why Usopp bawled as tears sprang from his eyes. Why would you do this, Grace? Usopp said as he sniffled before sobbing again. I beg you. Let me be happy. Wah. Calm down, Usopp. Luffy said as he sat down with a calm look on his face as he drank some tea. Ah, this tea is good. He said. Ace looked ready to fall over at their reactions. Holy crap. You weren't kidding, Luffy. He said as he looked over at Greg. And you are? The name's Greg. Greg said as he held out his hand. I'm a bomb man that ate the bomb fruit. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. Ace said as they shook hands. Bomb fruit huh? Every part of his body can explode. Valerie said. Speaking of which, Valerie said you tainted that rum somehow back at Little Garden. Usopp said. How exactly did that happen? Simple. No one was around for a few moments, so I had a bit of privacy to relieve myself. He said with a smirk. That is downright nasty. All the women and some of the men yelled. Well, Ace? Luffy asked calmly as he drank his tea. What do you think of my crew? They're definitely one of a kind. Ace said before looking at Luffy. How do I break that paint hypnosis? You just have to erase the mark or remove his vest. Grace said. Ace smirked at that. Easy enough. Ace said before throwing a tiny fireball on the back of Luffy's vest. The paint got ruined before Luffy jumped to his feet and danced around. Ahhhh. Ace, you bastard. I'm on fire. Put it out. He yelled before he just ripped it off and threw it overboard. After the vest hit the water, Luffy looked back at Ace before yelling. You trying to barbecue me? Luffy yelled. He panted as he noticed that they were all staring at his chest. What? What do you mean what? Luffy. How'd you get that scar? Ace yelled. Luffy looked down to see his jagged X-scar before looking at them all. I've seen you ripped open by bears, Luffy, and you healed from that perfectly fine. So what gave you a scar like that? Ace said, feeling very troubled at the thought of someone or something hurting his brother to the point of leaving a scar like that. Luffy just stared at him before he did what he usually would do. He began to sweat, averted his eyes, and pulled his lips to the side. I don't know. He mumbled before whistling. Everyone but Zoro fell over at that before jumping to their feet. Do you think we're that dumb? They all demanded. I won't ask again, Luffy. Who gave you that scar? Ace yelled. I can't say. It'll make me break my promise. Luffy said. Ace just glared at Luffy before sighing in defeat. Fine. But if I ever meet the guy who did this to you, I'm gonna teach him not to mess with my little brother. Ace said. Got it. Luffy said. Alright everyone. On to Uramalu. Aye. They all yelled. Everyone was sailing up the Sandora River doing various things. Zoro was swinging a giant weight around with Valerie on his shoulders, acting as another weight, while Chopper enjoyed the breeze he was making, while Alvida was posing for Grace in a painting. Johnny and Yusaku were dueling each other, while Jin was spinning his tonfa around while striking the air. Nami and Nojiko were watching out on the bow of the ship, while Karu was aimlessly wandering around, while Vivi started walking up towards them. Everyone else was in the cabin eating, relaxing, or goofing off. Do not play with your food. Sanji shouted as he hit Luffy and Usopp. If you idiots are bored, help Greg wash the dishes. I can't keep an eye on you guys and prepare food for the trip at the same time. Would you like some help? Ace asked. Nah. Sanji said with a smile. You're a guest. Just sit back and relax. He said before he spotted Luffy and Usopp washing dishes. You don't wash those in mop water. Greg is already using the sink. Luffy said. Then help him dry them and put them away. Sanji shouted, quickly losing his patience while Ace smiled. Up on deck. Nami? Can we anchor for a moment? Vivi asked. Sure, but why? Nami asked. I need Karu to run an errand for me. She said. Soon they stopped near the shore and got off the boat as Vivi told Karu to send a message to her father. She explained that the message explained all that she and Igaram discovered while undercover, that Crocodile was behind it all, and that she was okay and traveling with some strong-willed friends. Everyone smiled as Karu saluted while Vivi told him to conserve his water. She gave him the letter before he took off and they all got back on board. They traveled a bit farther down the river until they came to the shore where their journey to Yuba would start. What's going on here? Sanji shouted in distress as he gaped at all the women with tears in his eyes. What happened to your dancer clothes? The desert heat will burn us if we don't wear this. Vivi said before handing Luffy a set of desert clothing. Sanji began rolling around on the deck and mumbling his sorrow as everyone else got into desert garbs. Before they could disembark, an enormous group of kung fu dugongs appeared all around them. Topper translated one of them talking and told them that they had to beat him to anchor here or to go somewhere else before calling them chickens. Chicken huh? Usopp said with a confident grin. We'll show you. Johnny and Yusaku shouted before all three jumped onto shore. Don't. VV shouted right before the trio were lying on the rocks beaten and out cold. Kung fu dugongs are very strong. I win. Luffy yelled after knocking a different one out. Luffy won against a dugong. No, Jiko said. That's even worse. VV yelled as the dugongs all bowed to Luffy. The code of the kung fu dugong is that they become students to whoever defeats them. She explained as the dugongs all looked at Luffy with stars in their eyes. He got more followers in mere seconds. VV screamed. Luffy didn't mind as he was now having them all punch like him. Don't just throw a punch. Put your spirit into every punch. Luffy shouted before turning his fists black. Like this? He shouted. All of the dugongs shouted in agreement before they began to punch as well, while the whole crew watched in bewilderment. Ace was staring in shock and awe however at the sight of his little brother. Haki? He thought. But how? His thoughts were broken however when Luffy shouted that they'd now be heading to Yuba. You're bringing them too, Zoro shouted as he saw all the kung fu dugongs line up behind Luffy. No way Luffy. Nami protested as Valerie laughed. They can't cross the desert. VV said before a few dugongs were holding onto Luffy's legs, begging him to take them with him. All three of them just stared at the scene with pity in their eyes. So cute. They thought before whispering. Why do I feel like a bad guy here? Valerie asked. Because we can't take them, even though they wish to come. Nami said. What do we do? VV asked. Chopper had the answer before they could think of one as he reached into their supplies and pulled out some food. I'll give you this if you stay. He said. The dugongs cheered before taking the food and Chopper away. Help. After they helped Chopper and left a good majority of their food with the kung fu dugongs, the group began its trek across the desert. Why couldn't we take them? Luffy asked. The group is too big as it is, moron. Nami said. Always causing trouble? Ace asked with a grin. Every chance he gets. Half of them groaned as they all reached the top of the sand dune and stared down at a ghost town. Is this Yuba? Jin asked. No. VV said as she stared around with sadness in her eyes. This is Aramalu, the city of green. City of green? No, Jiko asked as they all looked around. The whole town was half buried in sand with more sand blowing everywhere. This city is an example of what Baroque Works is doing to this country and its people. VV explained as they all began walking through the town. Everyone was staring around. VV told them that it used to be a lively place with water and plant life before the rain suddenly stopped 3 years ago. As they traveled further and while talking about Dance Powder, Greg, Valerie and Grace were looking around the whole town. Each of them had been to Alabasta, but to places like Rainbase or the Spider's Cafe out where they would meet. But now that they were against Baroque Works, seeing all that they helped to do just felt like a giant weight was now pulling down on each of them. And it didn't really help that VV was now explaining about the scandal that began about the king using Dance Powder and using it to steal the rain from everywhere else in the country. What's this road, VV-chan? Sanji asked. This was the canal that brought water in from the Sandora River. She explained. It was mysteriously destroyed however, and without it, the city slowly dried up and couldn't sustain itself anymore. Everyone left to other towns to find water until the city of Green fell to ruin. She said as the wind picked up. It's just the wind blowing around the buildings. Ace explained as some of them began to freak out about hearing something moan. VV's hood blew off as she stared in dismay and sorrow. It sounds like the city itself is crying. She said as a sandstorm blew around them. Everyone closed their eyes and braced themselves as the storm blew around them. Crocodile. Luffy said in anger. What? Jin shouted. Look. Luffy said. Everyone tried their best to see through the sandstorm before some of them saw an image that made some of their blood run cold before the wind died and everything returned to normal. What was that? Usopp stuttered in fear. What did you guys see? Nojiko asked. I saw it. Zoro said with his hand to his blade. I saw a hand sweep through that storm. And a cape. Sanji said. A hand and a cape. Gray said in fear and understanding. It had to have been him. Greg said as Valerie gulped. Crocodile. Vivi said with hate in her voice. You mean the guy causing all this trouble in Alabasta? Chopper shrieked. Right. Vivi said before spotting a cloak in the sand. Everyone rushed over to it only to find a skull there. Vivi fell to her knees before asking what right Crocodile had to do this to people who lived in the desert. I'll never forgive him for this. She screamed out as Luffy knocked over a nearby building in frustration. After she and Ace buried the skull, they kept on walking for Yuba. After some time though, the desert heat was beginning to get to some of them. Zoro had to pull Chopper due to his fur, making the heat worse, while Usopp used a stick to keep himself walking. Vivi was okay since she was born in this country, while some of them women fanned themselves with their hand. Luffy still used a stick but kept quiet due to his time in Impel Down. Jin was taking a sip of water as Valerie shifted to 1 kilo and sat on the sled next to Chopper. Ace was watching everyone from under his hat before Usopp and Chopper began yelling at each other. Knock it off. Zoro yelled as he shoved Chopper down to his smaller size. Hey, Vivi. What's with all these hills? Usopp asked with his tongue hanging out. I thought the deserts were all flat. It's a very old desert, she said. Some of these sand dunes reach up to 900 feet high. That tall? Nojiko asked as Usopp looked ready to cry. This is gonna take forever. Johnny said as Yusaku wiped his brow. Water break. Luffy said. Don't drink a lot, Luffy. Nami warned. That water is for all of us. Luffy only took a small mouthful as he was told, which surprised Ace a bit. First the crying when we met, then the hockey, and now he's rationing water instead of chugging it. What happened to you, Luffy? Ace thought. They kept on their journey until night fell, bringing a cold temperature with it. Luffy was complaining about being hungry, while Sanji kept having to kick him away from the food until it was done. What happened? Nami asked as most of them shivered from the cold. Hot in the day, cold in the night. It's due to the lack of cloud cover. Vivi said. Without it, it's scorching by day and freezing by night. It's just one of the many dangers of the desert. Wow. Chopper said as he gazed at the night sky. So many stars. Didn't you watch them from your home island, Chopper? Usopp asked. The sky was almost always full of heavy snow clouds, so it was difficult to see this many. Chopper said with a smile. I'm too cold to enjoy them. Usopp stuttered. Same here. Greg said before he felt a sneeze coming. Ach boom. Went Greg when he held his hands to his nose, causing his head to explode. Talk about blowing your nose. Nojiko joked as most of them laughed. Shut up. Greg said before growling at them when they couldn't stop snickering. Soon the food was ready before they started eating. Everyone was chatting while Ace and Vivi were away from the group having their own talk about Luffy. About how Luffy was strange and how he did things. He's always been like that, Ace said. Been that way since a kid. I'm actually surprised to see that he's matured even slightly. He's a moron, but he attracts many people around him. He's got this strange charm about him. Guess I didn't need to tell you anything then? She asked with a smile. He and I do go way back. I appreciate it though. Ace said with a smile. You thought I was worried about him, weren't you? Yes, though it seems I didn't need to worry. She said. Ace. Vivi. Luffy shouted. Both of them looked to see them all eating. What are you two doing? The food's gonna be gone if you don't get it before Luffy does. Jin said as he chewed some food. Let's go eat. Ace said. Vivi nodded before joining them all. They all ate and laughed before they all finally started to get tired. Good night. Most of them said. Hey Ace. Luffy said. Yeah? Ace asked before noticing the serious look in Luffy's eyes. What's wrong? Follow me. Luffy said as he walked off away from the campsite. Ace kept a blank look as he followed until they were both out of earshot from the others. Alright Luffy. What's going on? Ace asked. Luffy just stared at his brother before lowering his head so his hat covered his eyes. What I'm about to tell you can't be told to anyone else. Okay. Luffy said. Would this have anything to do with that scar of yours and that promise? Ace asked as they sat down in the sand. Yes. The promise I made was that I can't tell anyone outside my crew who he was or how he did it. Not even you Ace. Sorry. Okay. Ace said. So, what was it that whoever did that you can't speak about it with the rest of your friends? I've only told Zoro, but I'll tell the others eventually. Luffy said. Ace. There's a power out there that can let people go back into the past. What? Ace said in confusion. Go back into the past. Yeah. That guy did it so that I could go back into the past. Luffy said. Wait a minute. Are you trying to tell me that you're from the future or something? Ace said. Yes. Luffy said with a serious look. Ace could only blink at that before asking the million-berry question. Why would you go back into the past? He asked. Luffy looked up at Ace with eyes filled with pain. Because I lost everything. Luffy answered in an almost silent voice. Everything was taken from me. My crew, my friends, you. He said as tried not to sob. You're alive. Were the words that sprang to Ace's mind. The pieces were finally starting to fit together. I died. He asked. Yes. Luffy said in a sob before hugging his brother. Ace did nothing but look down at Luffy. Luffy may be a lot of things, but one thing he wasn't was a liar. Ace hugged Luffy back and let Luffy cry. Luffy cried for about 10 minutes before wiping his eyes and regaining himself. Luffy, Ace said. Aside from your promise, tell me everything. And he got what he asked for. Luffy had told him about how his crew had been traveling the Grand Line and were deep in the New World before the world government too much of them. How his crew was killed before his eyes before he was put into impel down and tortured. Ace just sat there and listened as Luffy finished explaining how this unknown person helped Luffy out and sent him back in time to fix everything and to stop the world government. That's a lot to take in, Luffy. Ace finally said. And it's not the worst of it. Luffy said. They didn't just stop at my crew. They went to every island I ever went to and? Ace asked. And killed all my friends on every island. Luffy nearly shouted. They started with Makino and so many people from our home island. They killed Dayton and the other mountain bandits that raised us. Then, they moved to the rest of the East Blue Islands were visited before going to the Grand Line and taking out anyone who they thought was my friend. They ranted before curling into a ball and spoke in a broken voice. No one was safe. And they kept bringing me newspapers in prison every time they killed one of my friends. And they claimed it as an act of justice. That it was to keep anyone from spreading any more ideas about being pirates. Luffy let the tears fall as Ace watched while his hands curled into fists. This is just sick. He said with anger in his voice. How far will those bastards go? Remember, Ace, you can't tell anyone about this. Luffy said. If the world government got a hold of that power, they could also make people vanish from existence. Ace looked at him with wide eyes before nodding. Right. He said before yawning. Well, I'm glad you told me. Ace said as they walked back towards the campsite. Yeah. Luffy said. Hey, Ace. Yeah? This Blackbeard guy that you're chasing, be careful when you do find him. Luffy said. Ace allowed a small smile. I will. He said before they both went to sleep. Morning came rather harshly for everyone as a sandstorm was the first thing that greeted them. Sandstorms are another danger in the desert. Vivi shouted. Tell us these things sooner. Usopp shouted as they all braced themselves. The sandstorm blew around them for a while before dying out. Everyone began to dig themselves out of the sand before looking around. Lee. Johnny said. I got sand in places that I didn't know were there. Yusaku said. One heck of a wake-up call. Zoro groaned. Where'd the tents go? Jin asked. Soon they all dusted off their clothes before packing up and traveling again. Can we eat yet? Luffy asked. No. Not until Vivi says so. Sanji said. Please Vivi. Can we eat? Luffy said. We're not even close to Yuba yet, Luffy, so we have to make our supplies last. She said. Haven't you ever heard the proverb, Vivi? Eat when thou art hungry. Luffy said. You made that up. Usopp groaned. Words to live by. Jin said with a smirk. You're not helping. Usopp shouted. Okay, Luffy. We'll eat at the next group of rocks we stop at. She said. Then let's get going, guys. Luffy yelled before challenging them all to a game of rock paper scissors, with the winner carrying everyone's stuff. Luffy won and was now carrying it all, despite not knowing how it happened. He'll never change. Ace said under his breath as Usopp spotted rocks up ahead. Time to eat. Luffy yelled as he raced off towards the rocks with all the supplies. Fast. Usopp yelled. Luffy was now resting in the shade before hearing some pain-filled groans coming from a few rocks over. What's that? He asked himself as he went over to look. He gasped when he spotted a group of injured birds lying all over the place. What happened? Hang on. I'll get you a doctor. He said before he started running. He ran a few yards before suddenly stopping. Wait a second. Didn't those birds run off with our crap? He said before running back. Sure enough, the birds were up and healthy and packing everything onto their backs with sneaky smiles on their beaks, not even noticing Luffy running at them. Back with the others. Stupid moron running off like that. Zoro grumbled. If he ate everything again, I'm gonna kill him. Sanji said. That's a high possibility. Ace said. Before they could go further, all of them saw a flock of strange birds flying away, looking like they got into a fight with a sea king. What happened to them? Jin asked. VV gasped before telling them that those birds are known for deceiving travelers and stealing their stuff. Yes, they tried to steal from Luffy. Alvida said with a smirk. They all finally got to the rocks before spotting Luffy acting like a guard. Hey guys. Luffy said with a grin. Some birds tried to steal our stuff, but I kicked their asses. He said. We saw that. Greg said before seeing one of them lying on the ground next to a rock. One of them didn't get away. That's definitely a Warasagi bird. VV said. Grace walked over to see it before it lunged at her and grabbed her backpack before flying away and squawking. What's he saying? No G-Ko said as Grace got to her feet. He said that guy's crazy, but we ain't leaving empty-handed. Chopper said. That's got all my art supplies. Grace cried out as she tried to give chase. I got it. Luffy said as Sanji followed. Both of them chased after the bird before Luffy sent a tempest kick at it. The bird freaked out and dropped the bag which Sanji caught before a group of giant plants began attacking them. They fought them all off and helped a camel in the process before they began running from something under the sand. Where did that camel come from? No G-Ko asked. What are they running from? Jin asked. He got his answer when a giant purple lizard appeared from under the sand. What is that thing? Usopp shrieked. The Sandora dragon. VV shouted. It's the largest reptile in the desert. Its fangs and claws are razor sharp, yet they only need to swallow their prey whole. Just like when we were kids. A said with a smile. Luffy's always attracting trouble one way or the other. Yeah, and we have to clean up his mess. Zoro said. Still, I bet that stupid cook helped him out. He said as he ran towards them. You two morons need a hand. Like we need any help from you, Mosshead. Sanji said. Don't worry. We got dinner right behind us. Luffy said before all three of them jumped at it. Gum. Tatsu. Epal. Pistol Maki shoot. All three of them attacked at once, defeating the giant lizard with ease. All but Ace gapped at them as the lizard fell down dead. That was a little overkill, guys. Usopp said. Way to go, big bros. Johnny and Yosaku cheered. I feel bad for whoever those three gang up on. Nami said before another lizard appeared right behind them. Another one, Nami shouted as the rest freaked out. I forgot to mention that they hunt in pairs. VV yelled. Stop forgetting these things. Most of them said as Ace looked at it in boredom. Watch out, Ace. No G-Ko yelled. Big guy, isn't he? Ace asked. Wanna fight, huh? Alright then. Ace said as he jumped into the air before being swallowed. The lizard's mouth and nose erupted with fire before it was surrounded in a pillar of fire, while Ace jumped out towards the others. The others stared in shock as the crispy lizard fell down dead. These rocks are nature's frying pan. Sanji said. After the fight, everyone began eating the lizard while wondering where the camel came from. Chopper immediately recognized him and smiled. I remember you. He said. When he was getting supplies, he somehow wound up in Katoria but escaped thanks to him. The passenger carrying camel, huh? That'll be a great help out here. Usopp said. Looks like he can carry two at a time. Sanji said. Camels and deserts go hand in hand. Zoro said. Good. I'm tired of walking. Me first. Jin said before the camel bit down on his head. What was that for? That's when Chopper translated for the camel, telling them that though he was grateful that they saved him, he'd only carry females, which resulted in a majority of the men kicking his ass until he was black and blue. Did my barbaric friends hurt you? Nami asked in a sweet voice, making the camel's eyes turn into hearts. Now, what should we call a sweet guy like you? Idiot. Moron. Lame ass. Dumb shit. Fuckface. We'll call you Eyelash. Nami said. All those names, and you picked that? Zoro asked. So, who gets first shift then? Alvida asked. After a quick debate, Nami, VV, and a 1 kilo weighing Valerie got the first right as most of the men started calling out pervert camel. Now we can get to you but faster. Nami said. Go Eyelash. Nami said. Eyelash then dashed off with them on board. Hey. Wait up. Everyone else said. The women followed Eyelash just fine. The men, not so much. Ace got lost in the middle of nowhere while the rest of the men were now wandering around the desert before encountering the Barbar Sand Pirates and their captain Barbarossa. Luffy had jumped over and broken the mast by accident since they had all the women tied up besides Alvida before they apologized for treating their friends like that. Since the mast was now broken, Luffy and VV, along with Rasa and Zaba, went to a nearby ruin to gather wood. When they got there, they learned that Rasa was a citizen of the once great city before it fell to ruin. She stayed, clinging on to a promise that if anything happened to the city, the king would come and help. No one came before she joined up with Barbarossa, yet she asked why she stayed. Vivi cried before apologizing to her and they went back with the wood. With the ship. Back at the ship, the ones who stayed behind had started to bond with the sand pirates before desert bandits had arrived to attack them. The Barbar pirates got ready to fight before the desert bandit leader got flattened by a ball of dung from a grand dung beetle. The ball flattened Barbarossa, but Zoro, Sanji, and Greg destroyed it before it could hit the ship. But Ace was still wandering the desert after frying a giant scorpion and was riding atop a strange lizard. "Luffy? Where are you?" he called. Back with the ship. The Straw Hats left to go towards a village called Ido as they waved goodbye to their new friends. As they did, Vivi saw that Rasa was waving as well before she waved back with a watery smile. As they got closer, they saw Ace coming towards them with a lizard pulling a large amount of food and water behind them. When Vivi asked how he got it, he explained that small group of people calling themselves the Rebel Army were there. Turns out, they were fakes who used the name of Rebel Army to freeload off the town. Vivi was angry, but Ace said that, thanks to them, bandits and such left the village in peace. Vivi then decided to test them to see what they would do. Meanwhile, the rebel army tried to escape, only to be surrounded by all the male Straw Hats, while the villagers watched and cheered them on. Luffy attacked the leader and knocked him on his ass with a single punch. As he lay there, he remembered that he wanted to be as strong as the heroes of Alabasta that he looked up to when he was a kid. He then got up and told them that they may be fakes, but they'd die as heroes before punching Luffy. His friends then stood up, only to watch as Luffy and his friends run, saying how strong their spirit was. Vivi was pleased to see them stand up to fight and had no problem leaving the village's protection in their hands as they all moved on. Some time later. Everyone was traveling onwards to Yuba. The boys were getting into petty arguments about water. Alvida, Nojiko, and Grace, due to her small size, were riding on Eyelash and Vivi was telling a story about the rebel leader. She told them about Koza, how they met, the Sand clan, his father, the bandits that tried to kidnap her, and how Yuba was built after the king put Koza's father, Toto, in charge. When she was asked why she talked about Koza, Vivi told them all that he was the leader of the rebel army, while the boys ate a giant scorpion they had found and killed. The women just left in a huff at their stupidity before they all kept on going through the desert. Some more time later. Everyone was eating or attacking Luffy for stealing their food while a man was watching from afar. He was aiming a bazooka at Ace before his bird had defused, which caused him to yell and chase him. While that was happening, Luffy was following a floating piece of meat before he heard the man yelling. The man's bomb dropped down the giant rock he was on, but Luffy caught it before talking with him. They then left as the man said his name was Scorpion and that he was gonna fight Ace. While that was happening, Ace and the rest of the Straw Hats met two young brothers named Dip and Chip. They asked them to find a man, but were stopped when the same man came riding towards them on an ostrich with Luffy accompanying him. The man then challenged Ace to a fight, who accepted without hesitation. The two fought, with Ace winning by a landslide, until Chip and Dip begged their father Scorpion to stop. The Straw Hats listened and discovered that their father gave up the bounty hunting life, which was his dream, to raise his kids. He went back to bounty hunting to show his boys that life should be lived, no matter the hardship. The two boys begged him to come home as the three of them hugged each other, but was short-lived when Scorpion's bazooka shot out and blasted the rocks above them. Ace jumped in and saved them by blasting the rocks, along with the whole rock cliff, away with his fire fist. Near nightfall. "Well, I'm off," Ace said as he gathered his things. "You're really leaving, Ace?" Chopper asked. "Yeah. Blackbeard's not in Alabasta, so I have no reason to stay here," Ace said. "Where are you heading off to now, Ace?" Grace asked. "Scorpion says Blackbeard was seen out west. I'll try there," Ace said as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a bit of paper before throwing it towards Luffy. Luffy caught and looked at it before gasping a bit as memories of this paper burning away as his brother died flooded his mind. "Luffy," Ace said, snapping Luffy out of his thoughts. "That paper will reunite us one day." "Okay," Luffy said. Ace's smile faltered when he saw the pain and nervousness on Luffy's face. "Don't worry, Luffy. I'll be okay," Ace said with a smirk as he placed his hand on Luffy's left shoulder. Luffy sighed before a smile came to his face. "I know you'll be fine, Ace," Luffy said. "This time, I won't let you die, Ace," he thought as Ace looked at Luffy's crew. "Having a little brother like Luffy always makes his big brother worry," Ace said. "You'll all have your hands full taking care of my screwball brother. No doubt about it," he said. "Luffy. Next time we meet is at the Pirate Summit. Right?" Luffy said with determination in his eyes. "At the top," Ace said with a grin. "Aye," came two small voices. Everyone looked to see Scorpion, his ostrich, and his two sons waving goodbye before leaving. They waved goodbye before turning back to Ace, only to see that he had disappeared. "He's gone," Johnny and Yasaku said as they all looked around. "Fire Fist Ace." Sanji said. Luffy stared at where Ace was with a sad look in his eyes before smiling. "We'll meet again. That's a promise," he said before they all continued on towards Yuba. Everyone was continuing on their journey at a slow pace as they had split into two groups. Most of the females and Eyelash the camel were now resting in some nearby ruins as they tried to catch their breath. What happened with the captain?" Valerie wheezed as she set an unconscious Grace down in the sand. "I don't know." Nojiko said as she looked back at where they all were running from. "I've never seen Luffy so violent before." "And what was that strange power he let off?" Vivi said. "It knocked Grace out and nearly all of us as well." Sanji wouldn't let him eat anything, so he ate some nearby cacti. Grace mumbled as she woke up before shaking like a leaf. As they were all discussing why Luffy went bonkers, Nami was staring in concern at what Luffy said. "I won't let you take them away again," she whispered to herself. Luffy all of them continued on as the sun began to set. It was a little before the sun sunk over the horizon that the men all caught up to them. "Eyes," Vivi said with a smile before it was replaced with horror. All of them were walking towards them, limping really, as they were all bandaged up and covered in dirt and bruises. "What happened to you all?" Nojiko asked. "Don't tell me Luffy did all that." "He did all of this alright," Sanji said. "Had to fight him to get him to stop." Earlier. The crew was continuing their journey on to Yuba before Luffy's stomach grumbled. "Sanji, food please," Luffy said. "Forget it. You keep asking every 15 minutes and I keep telling you no," Sanji said in an irritated tone. Luffy only pouted before stumbling over some cacti. "I'll eat this then," he said with a grin as he took two of little cacti up and popped them into his mouth. Chopper groaned from where he lay on his makeshift sled as he looked up at Luffy. "Luffy, what are you eating?" he said in a weak voice. "You shithead," Sanji said as he noticed the chewing as well. "I told you not to eat our food." "He ate some stupid cactus from the ground," Usopp moaned out as he used a stick to keep upright while walking before pointing at one on the ground. "See? Oh no. That kind of cacti has hallucinogens in it," Chopper cried out as he sat up on his sled. "Too late to tell Luffy that," Jin said as Luffy began wigging out and going crazy. He started swinging at nothing as he ran around in circles with swirls in his eyes. "It's too hot to deal with big bro like this," Johnny moaned out. "Next time brother Cook, please just give him a snack when he asks," Yusaku groaned out. "Go get him Zoro," Nami said. "Why do I have to do it?" Zoro asked. "I remember a debt you owe me," Nami said. Zoro just scowled at her before walking towards Luffy. He started grumbling about how he hoped she'd die a gruesome death one day before noticing Luffy staring at them all. "Hey Luffy. You calmed down yet?" Zoro asked. Luffy just stared at them as his clenched up so hard his knuckles turned white. "Luffy. Hey, what are you? Akai and you?" Luffy roared as an intense wave of haki flew out around him and slammed into them all. All of them nearly passed out while Grace fell of Eyelash and hit the sand. What's going on?" Zoro thought. "Why is he using haki on us?" he thought as he struggled to look up. When he did though, he saw his captain slowly approach them while steam was emitting from his body. What's going on?" Valerie asked. "The magma bastard," Luffy growled. "First Ace, then my crew, then everyone we met." What's he talking about?" Usopp stuttered as they all started to sweat. Zoro's eyes widened before he took out all three of his swords. "Everybody run," Zoro ordered. "What?" most of them shouted. "He's not playing around," Zoro shouted. "He's not thinking straight. Run," he ordered. "Alright," Usopp shouted as he turned to run. "Get back here," Luffy shouted as he stretched his hand out, grabbed Usopp by his cloak and flung him around to slam him into a sand dune. "None of you Marines are leaving here. Big bro," Johnny and Yusaku shouted as the rest looked on in horror. The dust cleared to show Usopp lying in the sand with a bent nose. "Oh." Usopp groaned before he heard sand crunching and spotted Luffy coming at him with a look on pure hatred on his face. "Ah. Luffy. Stop it. That's enough." Sanji yelled as he ran and jumped towards Luffy. "Collier shoot," he shouted as he kicked Luffy in the neck. Luffy didn't budge an inch before grabbing Sanji by the leg and swatting Usopp with him so that they both flew and hit the sand with a loud thud. "Won't work. I've trained for this day," Luffy growled before roaring at them all. "I won't let you take them away again." "We gotta go," Nami shouted. "But what about Luffy?" Vivi said in worry. "It's us who we have to worry about. Luffy's not listening at the moment," she said. "Good idea," Valerie said as she grabbed Grace before they started to run. "Oh no you don't," Luffy shouted before dodging a sword. While Zoro, the men, and Alvida confronted him, the other women left in a hurry. "Luffy. You gotta snap out of it," he shouted. Luffy only responded by yelling and attacking him. "Knock it off, Luffy," Jin said as he smashed a tonfa into Luffy's side. He sent Luffy flying a few feet away as the others caught their breath. That didn't seem to stop him, for he jumped out of the sand and charged at them all. "I don't want to do this, big bro," Johnny shouted. "But you need to be stopped before you hurt someone," Yusaku yelled. Both of them charged at Luffy with their swords ready to strike. Luffy just glared at them as he caught both the blades with his bare hands. His hands bled before ripping their swords out of their hands as he stretched his arms back. Goom. Twin jet pistol," Luffy cried out as he sent both of them flying. Both of them skidded across the sand before coming to a stop. They both threw up some blood as they struggled to get up. Luffy yelled as he charged at them again before a series of explosions knocked him off his feet. "Never thought I'd have to use this," Greg said as he held up a smoking revolver. "Explosive bullets?" Jin asked as Greg blew his breath into the revolver chamber. "Even my breath is explosive," Greg said before a fist came out of the smoke and nailed him in the jaw. "Bastard," Luffy yelled. "I'll teach you to kill my friends." All of them were slightly confused before they steeled themselves. Everyone then charged at Luffy, knowing that it was the only way to get their friend to calm down. The fight lasted for about 10 minutes before Chopper finally found a chance to knock out Luffy with a sedative. Everyone was now groaning and holding on to themselves as they had to fight to stay conscious. "Shitty bastard," Sanji growled as they began walking. Chopper had patched them all up the best he could before they walked toward some rocks. As they were all walking, Chopper and Zoro began to talk about why Zoro joined the crew and why everyone did their own thing. Zoro told him about teamwork and wondered what it really meant before saying it was about individuals doing their own thing to help when needed. While they were talking, Luffy groaned as he finally woke up. "Whoa. I had a nightmare," Luffy said, not realizing where he was at the moment due to the heavy sedation. "Really?" Sanji said as he cracked his knuckles, looking ready to beat Luffy senseless for his earlier fiasco. "Pray tell, what was it?" Alvida asked. She was the only one who came out unscathed since Luffy didn't seem to lost enough marbles to forget to use haki when fighting them all. "That bastard that killed my crew and friends came after me, saying he wanted to kill them all over again," he mumbled. Everyone looked at each other in confusion or worry in Zoro's case as they all kept walking until they got in the shade as Luffy rested finally woke up and stretched. "Ah. What a great nap," he said. "Geez Luffy. Stop talking in your SLWO," Zoro said before falling down a hole. "Where'd big bro go?" Johnny asked. "I'm down here," Zoro yelled. "What are you doing, mosshead?" Sanji yelled. "Shut a dartboard brow. I'm not here by choice," he said. "How do we get down there to get you out?" Yusaku yelled before the area around their feet collapsed and they all fell in. "You had to ask." Greg grunted as they all looked around the area. They saw that they were in a dome with a strange stone inside covered in strange markings. "What's with the stone?" Jin asked. "I've seen these letters before in a book. It's sort of an ancient alphabet," Chopper said. They all talked about the stone for a moment before Luffy decided it was time to go and smash the ceiling a bit. "What are you doing?" Alvida yelled. "Everyone hang on," Luffy shouted as he wrapped his arm a few times around a nearby pillar. "Just go with it," Zoro said as they all hung onto Luffy. Luffy used his other arm and wrapped it around them all before getting them all back outside. Goom. Slingshot," he called out as they all began flying through the air. "How do we land?" Chopper yelled. "Don't know," Luffy called back. "Are you kidding me?" most of them shouted. "If Alvida-chan gets hurt, you're a dead man, Luffy," Sanji roared. "Alright. Hang on," Luffy said as he bit on his thumb. "Gear. Third," he said before inhaling a lot and blowing the air inside of his arm. "Bone balloon." Everyone gawked at him before he shot himself at the ground where they were going to land. "Giant balloon," he said as they all bounced off his giant belly before slowly deflating. Everyone was now safely on the sand before they clobbered Luffy and started walking again towards the other girls. Present. Everyone was now regrouped and walking for Yuba. While they were walking, Nami and Zoro slowed down until they were a good distance away. "Now what do you want?" Zoro said. "Luffy told me something back in Orange Town," she said. "You remember that scar on Luffy's chest?" "Yeah. What about it?" he asked. "He told me that the one who gave him that scar killed someone very important to him," she said. Zoro raised an eyebrow in wonder as he thought if Luffy had told her about the time travel. "It's what Luffy said earlier that's got you wondering, isn't it?" "I won't let you take them away again," she repeated. "It's the them part. I didn't know he lost more than one." "Okay. But why drag me back here?" he asked. "Because you know more than you're letting on," she said. "Luffy's been acting strange ever since he and his brother met. What's going on?" "It's not my place to say," You wanna know, you gotta bug Luffy about it. He said. Look. A light up ahead. Vivi shouted. Nami and Zoro let the discussion end as they joined up with everyone who were all trying to see Yuba through a sandstorm. After it died, they went farther in to find the rebel army. No, impossible. Vivi said in horror. The whole city looked just as bad as Aramalu. Deserted, covered in sand, and no water or people in sight. This is Yuba? Usopp asked as everyone looked around. Yes. But now it's all dried up like the rest of the cities around in Alabasta. Vivi said, looking ready to cry before hearing someone digging. Everyone looked to see a withered old man digging away in the sand. Travelers, huh? He asked in a raspy voice. Must be tired from your journey in the desert. Sorry, but the town's a little dry at the moment, so I'm afraid we can't offer much relief. Still, you can stay and rest for a while. We don't have much water, but there are plenty of inns to rest in. He said. Actually, we came to speak with the rebel army. Vivi said after covering her face. The rebels, huh? The old man said in anger before chucking various objects at them. If you want to see the rebels, then get lost. They aren't here anyway. They all packed up and left. They what? Everyone yelled. I forgot that. Luffy said in his head as the old man continued. This town keeps getting hit with nothing but sandstorms, so their supplies dried up. He said. The rebels are now stationed in Katoria. Katoria? Vivi said in horror. That's bad. Gray said. Why? Where is it? Jin asked. Is it nearby Big Sis Vivi? Yusaku asked. It's near Nanohana, all the way back where we started. She said. You mean we traveled all this way for nothing? Jin yelled as Eyelash started speaking. He says that he remembers delivering supplies to the rebels in Katoria. Chopper translated, causing a lot of them to beat the utter shit out of Eyelash. Vivi? The old man said as he stopped digging and walked towards her. She started to say. What do you want, old man? Greg said as he picked his nose, ready to attack just in case he tried anything funny. Vivi? It is you. He cried out as he grabbed her shoulders. Don't you recognize me? He asked. I've lost a bit of weight. No, Toto? She said in realization. He nodded and cried. It is me. He said. Vivi, I still have faith in you and your father, the king. He's a good and just king that truly does care about his people and would never betray them. He said before falling to his knees and crying. This rebellion is utterly absurd. Those faithless fools. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't stop them. Most of this country still believes in the king, but those rebels are too stubborn to listen to anything. Their supplies, men, and strength are at its limit, and they're planning to end this with one final assault. They're prepared to die. He screamed. Vivi looked horrified as he begged her to stop them before crying again. Vivi stood there and watched before offering him a handkerchief with a smile. Don't worry. She said. I'll stop them. Toto began to cry and hope at her words before she turned to everyone. We'll stay here for the night. When morning comes, we'll head to Katoria. She said. Everyone nodded before they found an inn to sleep in, not knowing that both Baroque Works and the rebel army were both preparing themselves. One to destroy the country and one to save it. Everyone had piled into the inns for the night to rest while Toto kept on digging. Alright everyone, Usopp said aloud. Good work to you all. Now, it's time for some well-deserved sleep. Good night. He said as he laid down in his bed and started snoring before a pillow smacked into the back of his head. You've been sleeping all day. Zoro yelled. Jerk. Usopp grunted as he slowly got up and threw a pillow at him. I'm not a monster like you. You're dead. Zoro said as Usopp threw a pillow at Chopper. And the grand prize for lazy people goes to you, Blue Nose. He said. I can't handle this heat. Chopper yelled as he got in Usopp's face. Sanji, that's my bunk. Vivi said. I thought you'd be a little lonely tonight, so he said before a pillow slapped him in the face. And what do you think you're doing over there? Usopp asked as Chopper giggled. Which one of you threw that at me? Sanji demanded. Heh. Pervert cook. Greg laughed along with Valerie, earning a pillow to the face which knocked his glasses off. Valerie just laughed harder until a pillow hit her, courtesy of Jin. Shut up. I'm trying to sleep. Jin yelled before Nojiko threw a pillow at him. Then be quiet and sleep. She said before she ducked as he threw it back, hitting Johnny in the process. Hey. He yelled as Yusaku threw it back, but hit Grace. Quit it. She said in an annoyed tone before she took the pillow and put it under her head with her other pillow and tried to sleep. Mine now. She said as Nami began yelling at them before one hit her, causing her to lose it and throw it back before all the boys in the room began a giant brawl as a pillow hit Vivi. Vivi and the women could only watch as they all fought before a smile came to Vivi's lips. I'm going to another inn. Alvida groaned as she walked out the door. Have fun with all your noise. Outside. While everyone was fighting, Luffy was asking Toto where the water was. "The water will come," Toto said as he kept digging. "The Yuba Oasis can't be beaten by mere sand. The king left this land to me. I'll dig the sand out as many times as I need to," he declared. Luffy smiled before placing his thumb into his mouth. "Hey old guy," Luffy said. Toto stopped digging for a moment and looked at him. "Get out for a second. I'm gonna give you a hand," he said before biting his thumb. "Gear third," he shouted before inflating his arm into a giant bone balloon. "What in the world?" Toto cried out. He just watched as the air in Luffy's arm moved into his chest before it seemed to even out and Luffy grew 5 times his size. "Giant Luffy," Luffy cried out as Toto got to a safe distance. "It's not nearly as big as when I was on Little Garden, but it's enough for this," he said as he began to tear into the sand, throwing out gigantic mounds of it as he slowly got deep into the well before he reached the damp sand. "I think I'm close to the water," Luffy said. "Amazing," Toto said before Luffy stopped and looked up at him with a huge grin. "I found water," Luffy said as he let the air out of himself. Toto blinked before walking over to the ledge of the hole. He looked down into the hole and smiled at the sight of the water up to Luffy's knees. "You were right old guy. There's water here," he said before cupping some into his hands and drinking it. "Ah. Water. Simply amazing," Toto said as tears of joy formed in his eyes. "The princess is very lucky to have found such kind-hearted friends like you." "Thanks for the compliment Mr. Toto," came a seductive tone. Both of them looked to see Alvida staring at him before looking down at Luffy. "Having fun Luffy?" "Hey Alvida. What are you doing up?" Luffy asked with a smile. "The others are being too noisy, so I came out until they quieted down," she said as she smiled down at Luffy. "And you captain?" "I was thirsty," he said before he cupped some more water and drank. "Want some?" "Maybe later," she said with a giggle as she stood up as the sand shifted slightly under her. "Watch out," Toto warned, but it came too late as the sand ledge collapsed under her. She tried to keep upright, only to find herself on a collision course with Luffy. Toto covered his eyes as a splash could be heard. He opened his eyes before looking down at them to see Alvida lying on top of Luffy, who was now submerged under the water. "You two okay?" he asked. Both Alvida and Luffy sat up as best as they could since Luffy was mostly underwater and was having his strength fade. Alvida pulled him up out of the water before leaving him to sit there and catch his breath. "Would you crash into me Alvida?" he asked as he looked at her. "Didn't you say you wanted some later?" "No. I slipped," she said as she got to her feet before shivering. "This cold night air and wet clothes don't mix," she said. "Let's get out of this hole," she said. "Alright," Luffy said as they both got out of the hole in the ground. "Are you two okay?" Toto asked as they both wrung out their clothes. "We're fine, but our clothes are soaked," Alvida said. "Do you have any spares?" Toto asked. Alvida thought for a moment before remembering something. "Yes, but it's not for crossing the desert," she said. "I'll take care of those before you leave tomorrow," Toto said. "Thank you," she said as she went to a different inn. "Yours too young lad," he said as he turned to Luffy. "Thanks old guy," Luffy said. Moments later. Alvida was now in the dancer outfit that Sanji got her as she handed Toto her wet clothes. "Thanks again for your help Toto," she said. "My pleasure," he said before walking off. She shut the door and looked back inside before smiling. "Nice outfit Luffy," she said with a smile. Luffy was standing in the same room with a bedsheet covering his lower half. "Thanks. I didn't have any other clothes, so I used a bedsheet," he said with his trademark grin. Alvida just stared at him with a smile before she felt her heart racing. "He's so scrawny, yet I can't look away," she thought. "Your outfit looks nice on you Alvida," he said. She just blushed at him as he stared. "Thank you," she said as she composed herself and grinned. "You know, it truly is nice," she said as she lifted her arms into the air. "If the one wearing it dances." She then began to sway her hips around as she danced in a circle. She kept an eye on Luffy to see that he was transfixed on her. "I got him right where I want him," she thought as she slowly got closer. "What do you think, Luffy?" "Wow," he said as his eyes followed her hips from where he sat on his bed. "I don't know why, but I can't stop looking," he said. "So innocent," she thought before sitting down next to him and leaning onto him, giving him a clear view of her cleavage. "Like what you see?" "Yep," he said as he felt that feeling course through him. Alvida smiled seductively before sitting up. "Care to look with your hands?" she asked with a wink of her eye before removing her top. "My hands?" he asked as he looked at them in confusion before looking at her. "They don't have eyes." Alvida had to fight back a laugh at his remark. "Not quite what I meant," she said. Luffy looked at her as she squeezed her arms against her breasts, making them stick out a bit and causing the underused light bulb in Luffy's head finally to turn on. "Oh." Luffy said as he suddenly reached his hands forward and placed it on her breasts. "You meant this?" "Exactly." She said with a gasp as Luffy squeezed her breasts only for them to slide out of his grasp. "Wow. You're slippery." He said as her breasts slid around as he tried to grasp them. She giggled and moaned as he grew frustrated before blinking in thought. "Oh yeah." He said before his hands became black as he squeezed her breasts. "Yeah." She moaned as Luffy was now fondling her breasts. "And big." Luffy said with a blush and a grin as he inched closer to her before catching her lips with his. Alvida moaned into the kiss as Luffy slid his hands behind her back and pulled her closer. Both were now making out on the bed as Luffy's hand explored her backside from her shoulders to her ass. Has he done this before? She thought as his touch was making her crazy. They broke for air as they panted and gazed at each other before Luffy began planting slow butterfly kisses on her chin and went down. He kept going until he reached right where her dancer skirt was before sticking his tongue out and letting it drag across her skin as he made his way back up past her navel, through her cleavage and finally stopping in her mouth for a quick kiss. "You taste amazing." He said in a slight tone that she never heard before. That seemed to be all she needed before sliding out of her skirt, leaving her naked before him. "How can you know for if you haven't tasted all of me?" She asked in a sultry voice as she lay before him. "Oh yeah." He said in realization before bringing his lips to her moist lips, earning a yelp from her as she felt herself getting hotter. Luffy's tongue danced around inside her as she tried to catch her breath. "Luffy." She screamed in her head as she tried to keep herself from climaxing too early. Luffy." She gasped out. I'm gonna." She couldn't finish as she finally broke and silently screamed as her juices flowed out of her. Luffy lapped up what he could as Alvida's back arched before she reached the end and let her back drop. She took several deep breaths before looking at Luffy, who was looking at her while licking a bit of her juices from his lips. "You were right." He said. "Now I can say you taste amazing." Alvida smiled before sitting up and pushing him down onto the bed. "Good." She said as she removed his bed sheet and gazed at his hardened member. "Because now, I get to taste you." Luffy just watched as Alvida gently licked the underside of his entire dick. His eyes glazed over as he laid down on the bed and let her do as she pleased. She ran her tongue up and down his penis before kissing the head. Luffy felt his breath catch as Alvida placed her mouth over his dick. She slowly bobbed her head up and down as she took in his whole length. She sped up and began to suck and slurp his dick while Luffy was breathing hard. "Alvida, I feel it coming soon." He said. She smiled mentally and she kept going before she felt his seed fill her mouth. She drank it all as Luffy blew his load before he stopped. She swallowed the last bit before releasing his member and smiling up at him. "Wonderful." She said in a low, sexy tone as she crawled up over him before sitting on him. "What are you doing?" Luffy asked as she began to against him, making him hard all over again. She leaned over to gently whisper in his ear. "I'm about to go for a ride." She whispered. Luffy's dick stiffened up. She positioned herself over him slowly dropping down. Her hymen broke immediately as she stayed in place to adjust herself and let the pain subside. "I'm surprised I could fit all of him into me," she thought as the pain subsided. She then began to bounce upon his member as it slid in and out of her before stopping. Guess my smooth fruit is making it less pleasurable," she said with disappointment in her voice. Luffy looked up at her sad face before he tried thinking. His eyes widened before he grinned at her. "Try again now. I'm betting it'll be different," he said. Alvida did as he said and immediately felt the difference. "I didn't know I could use hockey down there," Luffy thought as Alvida was now gasping in pleasure as she continued riding him. Luffy watched as her breasts bounced around before he reached up and cupped them in his hands. He felt them slide around before he started bucking his hips in rhythm with her. Both were in a state of pure bliss as Alvida had to stifle her screams of pleasure for fear the others would hear. She kept on going until Luffy told her he was nearing his climax and they changed positions, with her on the bed and him on top of her. He kept up the rhythm as they kissed before they both came. Luffy pulled himself out of her as both of their cum leaked onto the bed as she moaned loudly into his mouth. Both just looked into each other's glazed eyes before Luffy got up. Neither of them said anything as they both got dressed and were heading off to sleep. "I'm sleeping here. They're too noisy over there," Alvida said as she laid down in a different bed. "That's what makes it so fun," Luffy said with a grin before turning and walking out the door. "Hey Luffy," she called before he got 2 steps out. Luffy looked back to see her lying on her side and looking at him. "Anytime you're feeling up for it," she said as her hand slowly glided up her leg as she rested her head in her other hand. "Just say the word." She finished with a wink and a seductive smirk. Luffy blushed and smiled before heading off to sleep. Morning came and everyone was packing up and getting ready to go. Toto had given Alvida her clothes back, which were now dry, while Luffy was busy pulling his head out of a dead tree. "Would your friend with the blonde hair kick him?" Toto asked. "We don't know." They all answered. "What's your problem, Crud Cook?" Zoro asked in annoyance. "Shut it, Mosshead." Sanji growled back. "I just had the urge to kick him. That's all." "An urge?" Jin asked as he raised an eyebrow. Luffy finally managed to get his head free before joining everyone. "I wish you all good luck on your journey, Princess Vivi," Toto said. "I'm so sorry I can't offer any more help." "Don't worry," she said. "You've done more than enough, Toto. Thank you. Oh, before I forget," he said as he walked over towards Luffy while pulling a small barrel from under his robe. "This is for you, Luffy." "Water," Luffy said in joy. "And I have a whole barrel full for your entire group right here," he said as he walked towards another barrel. "Genuine Yuba water. It's my way of thanking you for helping me out last night." "No sweat, old guy," Luffy said with a grin. "We'll drink it wisely. Take care, my friends," he said as they all started walking. While they were walking, Nojiko and Nami moved a few steps away from everyone and were quietly whispering to each other. "That's the third time Sanji's kicked Luffy," Nojiko said. "Yeah, and he usually kicks him like that whenever Luffy steals the food at night," said Nami. "Since we still have food, would he kick him?" "Actually, it might not be a question of why, but when," Nojiko said. "What?" Nami asked in confusion. "The first time he kicked Luffy was the day we left our home island," she said. "The day after you and Luffy were." "SHH." Nami shushed. "I think I get it. The second time was the day after you and Luffy." "Uh-huh." Nojiko whispered while nodding. "And last night, Alvida left us and was sleeping in a different inn. So maybe she and Luffy," Nami said as they both looked at Alvida. "Only one way to find out," Nojiko said. Both were now walking towards Alvida before they were at each of her sides. "Hey Alvida." Nojiko whispered. She said as she looked at her. "How was Luffy?" she suddenly asked in a whisper. Alvida's eyes widened a bit before a small blush and a smile came to her lips. "I knew it," Nojiko whispered with a grin. "Yes, you were right," Nami said. "Luffy, what are you doing?" Usopp yelled. Every one of them turned to see Luffy sitting up against a dead tree with a pout on his face. "What's wrong, big bro?" Yusaku asked. "I quit," Luffy said. "Huh?" they all said. "You quit? Quit what?" Vivi asked in confusion. "I don't know what's wrong, but we gotta keep moving," Usopp said. "Yeah. Aren't we in a hurry?" Chopper asked. "We are," Sanji said. "We have to get back to Katoria or a million Alabasta citizens are gonna start killing each other. We're doing this for Vivi. Now move it," he said as he grabbed Luffy by his robe. Luffy just grabbed his arm and threw him to the side. "What's your problem?" Sanji roared. "Vivi?" Luffy said in a low tone as he glared at her. "Yes?" she asked in worry. "The only thing I wanna do," he said before looking pissed, "is kick Crocodile's ass." Everyone was shocked as he continued. "Even if we stop the rebels, Crocodile won't stop. Besides, nothing will change in Katoria. We're pirates. Nothing good happens when we're around. He gets to the point when he wants to," Sanji said as he crossed his arms. "Not often though," Usopp said. Vivi protested, saying that they needed to get to Katoria only for Luffy to state that she wanted to end all of this without anyone dying, before saying that she'll never win that way. "Luffy? Think about what your Nami started to say before Sanji cut her off." "Hold on," he said. "For what?" Nami demanded as Vivi flipped her hood off her head and glared at Luffy. "What's wrong with that?" she yelled. "What's so wrong about wanting to end this without anyone dying?" Luffy just stared up at her before answering. "People die," he said. Vivi snapped before slapping him, letting him skid across the sand as she began to rant about why any of the innocent people of her country, the citizens, the royal army and the rebel army, have to pay for Crocodile's doing. Luffy responded by getting to his feet and punching her so that she was knocked to the ground and asked. "So it's okay for only you to die? Big bro? Big sis?" Johnny and Yusaku shouted as everyone stared in shock. "You asshole." Sanji roared as he rolled up his sleeves. Vivi then tackled Luffy to the ground before she began to punch and slap him over and over, even with Luffy still talking. "Looking around in just one day in this country and even I can tell," he said. "Tell what?" she demanded. "What this country needs. You think putting just your life on the line is enough to stop this from happening?" he asked as she kept hitting him. "Then what exactly should I put on the line then, Luffy?" she asked as Luffy grabbed her wrists. She glared at him before she calmed down and said, "All I have to put on the line is my life. That's all." "How about our lives then?" Luffy demanded as he screamed out. "We're your friends, remember?" Vivi could only stare as her eyes welled up. Did you forget we're your friends, Vivi? He asked before she broke down completely and sobbed. He picked up his hat and dusted it off before speaking. You hate all that's happening here, so you want to get Crocodile the most. He said as Nami and Nojiko hugged Vivi as she cried. Everyone else watched as Vivi, the princess who loved a country that was killing itself, cry her eyes out as Luffy stood up and placed his hat on his head. Now tell me, Vivi, where's Crocodile? The group slowly began its trek towards Crocodile's base of operations in Rain Base. The City of Dreams. Vivi explained that it was north of Yuba and would take a full day to reach there. As they all walked, they all were talking about various things. Not resting on the sledge-chopper? Sanji asked. Nope. I'm toughing it out today. He said, causing a few of them to smirk. Hey, Luffy. Vivi said. Luffy looked back at her. Thank you. I never could have made this decision without your help. Then feed me. Luffy said with a grin. Vivi looked confused before he went on. Once I kick Crocodile's ass, feed me until I explode. Vivi just smiled before agreeing as they all walked on. The rebel army. The rebel army was preparing for a final assault on Alubarna to finally end this war and to free their country from its current king, despite not having enough weaponry. Soon thought the rebel leader Koza. Cobra's head will fall and this country will finally be able to rebuild. And Alubarna. I forbid it. Cobra shouted. Cobra Nefertari, king of Alabasta, was denying his two head soldiers to attack for various reasons. Two were that the country is its people and that attacking without knowing the enemy is pointless. Both Pell and Chaka were now discussing what to do about their soldiers' unrest before a random soldier shouted that Karu had returned. Soon, Karu was drinking his fill of water as Chaka, Pell, and Cobra were discussing the letter that Karu had delivered. Soon, they found out that Vivi was okay, that Igaram's whereabouts were unknown, and about the friend she was traveling with. But what shocked them the most was the name of the man that was behind the tragedy that has befallen Alabasta and its people. Crocodile. In Rain Base. Luffy and his friends were now, thanks to Luffy and Usopp, being chased around Rain Base by the Marines. It didn't take very long for the noise to attract the attention of Baroque Works before they too started chasing them. Everyone broke apart and were now running around various streets of the city and defeating Marines and Baroque Works millions before most of them ran for Rain Dinners, a casino owned by Crocodile. Inside Rain Dinners. Alright, Crocodile. Where are you? Luffy shouted from inside the casino. Everyone stared before going back to their gambling. He's not gonna come out just because you're yelling for him. Nami said as she and Usopp punched the back of his head. Luffy, Usopp, Nami, Zoro, Nojiko, Alvida, Johnny, Yasaku, and Grace were inside before they heard someone shouting behind them. You won't get away. Bellowed Smoker. Run. Nojiko shouted as they all started running, flinging security guards around the room before they saw some people offering them a welcome to the VIP room. VIP? Let's go that way. Luffy shouted. Follow big bro. Johnny and Yasaku shouted as they all ran inside the long hall with Smoker on their tail. VIP? What connection does Straw Hat have with Crocodile? Smoker asked himself. Doesn't matter. I'll see them all hanged. It splits off down there. Nojiko called. Left is VIP. Right is pirate. Usopp shouted. Which one should we take? Nami yelled. Pirate of course. Luffy shouted as they all went right. Straw Hat. Smoker yelled as he chased after them, only to find themselves at a dead end. Now what? Grace asked before the floor below them opened up and they all dropped. Going down. Usopp shouted in panic as they all fell. How'd we fall for this? Zoro asked in annoyance. We followed Luffy. How else? Alvida said in a calm voice as the rest just screamed while Luffy laughed. In a cage under Rain Dinners. Everyone was now in a cage under Rain Dinners, staring out in the room since they had no place to go. Where are we? Yasaku asked. The cage. Alvida said in a bored tone as she leaned up against the bars, only to slowly fall into a slump. Guh. Why do I feel so weak? She asked. Before they could answer, Luffy blocked Smoker's jut, only to find himself a bit weakened as well. Ah. Stupid weapon. Luffy muttered with his tongue hanging out. You can't be that weak, Luffy. Nojiko said. What's going on? The end of my jut is made of sea prism stone. Smoker explained. It's a strange mineral found in a certain area of the sea. Not much is known about it, but it emits the same energy like being thrown into the ocean. It drains the strength of devil fruit powers, which is why all marine prisons are made of them. So this cage is made of the same stuff? Johnny asked. Exactly. Which is why I haven't escaped. Smoker said. If I could, I would. Right after I made sure you lot never reach the seas again. Zoro flicked a blade out at Smoker's threat before Nojiko stepped between them. We have more important matters here. She said. Besides, he is Smoke Man. Nami said. You can't fight him. She's right. Came a voice. Relax everyone. All of them turned and looked to see the one causing all their troubles sitting in a chair and smiling at them. Crocodile. Smoker growled. TTT, that's him. Usopp stuttered as he and Nami stared in horror. So he's a warlord, huh? Zoro asked. Crocodile. Grace mumbled as she stared in horror, seeing Mr. Zero for the first time. Crocodile. Luffy shouted. Let me out of here so I can kick your ass. Every bit of scum that I knew you were. Smoker growled. Ah. Captain Smoker. Crocodile said as he stood up and looked at them all. Every bit the wild dog I heard you were. Unlike your superiors who believe in me, you never trusted me. Looks like you're right. He said as he walked over towards them a little. I'll have to give a report to the Marines about how you died in a struggle against Straw Hat Luffy here. I haven't a clue as to why you're in this country, but it must be of your own accord. The world government would never send you here. They have every belief in me as a warlord. He then eyed Luffy and his crew before his gaze stopped at Grace. Well, this is a surprise, Miss Goldenweek. He said, making her flinch. I had heard that the Mr. 5 pair had defected, but it looks like you've joined them as well. Guess that means you'll have to die too for your betrayal. You ain't hurting any of my friends, you sand croc. Luffy yelled. Stop it, Luffy. You'll piss him off. Usopp begged. Straw Hat Luffy. Crocodile said, never losing his smile. Congratulations on getting this far. I promise your demise will be done cleanly and efficiently once our guest of honor arrives. Guest of honor? Nami asked. My partner has gone to retrieve her at this very moment. He said. But Vivi, Jin, Valerie, and Greg. That's shit. Said a Baroque Works Millions man before he collapsed. Vivi, Jin, Valerie, and Greg had met up and were surrounded by Baroque Works before taking them all out and were now standing amongst a pile of bodies littered about. The four of them were roughed up but okay as they made sure no one else was around before relaxing. Thanks for your help. Vivi said. Don't worry about it. Jin said. Now, let's meet up with the rest of our friends. Before they could start searching, however, something flew in from the sky and landed before them all. Everyone saw what looked like a man-sized bird appear before them before changing into a man. Step away from Princess Vivi. He said as he went for his sword. If you're looking for a fight, Jin started before Vivi interrupted. Hell. She screamed in joy before she ran over and hugged her friend. I'm so glad to see you. It is good to see you unharmed, Princess. Pell said. Who is this guy? Jin asked. Hell the Falcon. Valerie said. Hell, these are my friends. Vivi explained. I see. He said with a smile before looking at Vivi. Your father and I received your letter. Then Kara made it to Alubarna safely? She asked. Indeed. We now know the enemy behind all the misfortunes of Alabasta. He said. Hate to interrupt, but I need the princess to come with me. Came a voice. Everyone looked to see Robin smiling at them all. Greg and Valerie turned a little blue while the rest of them glared at her. Miss All Sunday. Vivi said with a scowl. An enemy, I assume? Pell said as he drew his blade. That's correct. Robin said with a smile. Now, do yourselves a favor and release Vivi into my custody. I will not comply with such ridiculous demands. Pell shouted as he charged at her. Wait. Stop. Greg shouted, but it was too late. Says, Fleur. Robin said as 6 arms sprouted from Pell's body and held him in place. Everyone just watched as she calmly walked over towards him. Speed. Power. All of that is useless against me. Clutch. She said as a snapping sound came before Pell fell to the ground in defeat. Pell. Screamed Vivi as she watched her friend be defeated in no time at all. Now then, how about we join your friends and the boss? Robin asked. Back in the cage. Sanji impression. Luffy said as he acted like he was smoking. Who ate all the meat? He asked. Usopp, Johnny, and Yusaku started cracking up before Nami cracked their skulls. Enough. She screamed before they started bickering. And you. Wake up. She yelled before hitting a sleeping Zoro. Morning already? He asked with a lump on his head. It's the afternoon. Nami yelled. Leave it alone, Nami. No, Jiko said. We can't do anything now, so just try to relax. How can you be so calm? She asked. Someone's in high spirits. Said Crocodile as he enjoyed his meal. Just you wait. She said as she stood there with her hands on her hips. The moment we're out of this cage, this guy here's gonna kick your ass. Yeah. Now open the cage already. Luffy said as he grabbed the cage and slid down in weakness. Your crew seems to have a lot of faith in you. He said. Trust. Such a useless feeling. What did you say? Nami snarled. Quit it. Don't make him mad. Usopp said. Crocodile just seemed to smile as his name was called from the stairs. Everyone looked to see Vivi and Robin on the stairs. Vivi. Shouted most of the crew from inside the cage. Ah. Welcome Princess Vivi of Alabasta. I mean, Miss Wednesday. Crocodile said mockingly. Excellent work avoiding our assassins. I'd do anything and go anywhere to stop you, Mr. Zero. She said before running towards him with her weapons drawn. If not for you, Alabasta would be at peace. She roared as she attacked Crocodile, cutting his head off. All of the ones in the cage stared at Crocodile's headless body. Useless. Smoker said as Crocodile's body turned to sand before reforming behind Vivi. Crocodile's hand covered Vivi's mouth as he spoke. Feel better? He asked. As a native of this country, you should know that I possess the power of the sand fruit. He said as he had reappeared. Shall I make turn you into a mummy? He asked. Get your sandy hands off of her. Luffy shouted. Crocodile only smirked at them before forcing Vivi into a chair as he finished his meal. Comfortable? He asked. You're just in time for the party. Right, Miss All Sunday. He said. Party? Nami asked as Robin pulled out a pocket watch and looked at the time. It's noon. Operation Utopia has begun. She said. Crocodile started to laugh like the madman he was before Johnny asked what that was. Simple. Crocodile said. It's the end for the kingdom of Alabasta. I'm going to wipe it off the map and plunge its citizens into eternal despair. Let Operation Utopia begin. He said before laughing again before Vivi demanded to know what he was planning. If you plan on killing my father, you'll be dead before you can reach him. She shouted. I have no interest in killing him. He said. Rather, I plan to have him experience something far worse than death. What could be worse than death? Usopp asked. You don't want to know. Luffy mumbled as Crocodile just grinned before telling her everything. As he did, his agents were going around in Alabasta, carrying out their final orders. To kidnap the king, have Mr. 2 disguise as him and attack the citizens of Nanohana and spur the rebellion into a final assault. Everyone in the cage were now glaring at Crocodile in anger horror as he began to laugh again. Well, what do you think? He asked. The operation you once helped with has now reached fruition. Can you hear it, princess? The howls of the kingdom's people screaming the same thing. Protect Alabasta, protect Alabasta, protect Alabasta. Stop it. Vivi screamed. How can you be so cruel? Heartbreaking, isn't it? He asked with a grin. Their love for their kingdom will be what destroys it. Asshole. No Jiko muttered under her breath as Vivi tipped her chair over and was now trying to crawl away. Where are you running off to? Crocodile asked. To stop you. She said as she glared at him. If I can reach Alubarna east of here before the rebel army, I can stop them. There's still a chance. Crocodile chuckled at her before she went on. I won't give up. I'm going to stop you. It just so happens that we're heading to Alubarna as well. Crocodile said. You can come if you wish, or you can stay here and save them. He grinned as he held up a small key. Vivi began to struggle against her ropes as Crocodile dropped the key. She had broken free and reached for it, only for Crocodile to activate the trapdoor and let it fall into a banana gator den. Both armies will start killing each other soon. At your best speed, you may not make it in time. If you wish to stop the rebellion, then you must leave immediately, Miss Wednesday. Or, will you stay and save them instead? Sorry, but I accidentally dropped the key to the lower chamber. Into the banana gator den. Vivi stared down in horror as the group in the cage began to stare at the multiple banana gators swimming around before Vivi gasped in horror. What happened? Alvida asked. One of them just swallowed the key. She said. That just caused a few of them to start freaking out inside the cage while Crocodile watched in amusement. Apologies. I seem to have mishandled the key. He said. Oh well. No telling which one of them swallowed it. He said as he began walking towards the door. If only I could get out of here, I'd deal with those oversized handbags myself. Zoro stated. It's time we were off. Crocodile said as a door opened with a snap of his fingers. All of them looked at him as he explained that this room would fill with water from the lake and they would all drown in 1 hour. 1,000,000 innocent people or a handful of pirates with no future. Which will you save, Miss Wednesday? They all glared at him as he stated that this country was full of idiots that made his job easy before mentioning Toto and Yuba and how he would try and keep a dead Oasis alive no matter what happened. Tell me, Straw Hat Luffy. Do you think sandstorms hitting the same spot over and over is natural? What do you mean? Vivi asked as Luffy glared at him, feeling rage all over again as Crocodile turned his hand into a small sandstorm. So he's the reason for all the dried up cities? Alvida asked as Vivi glared at him with nothing but pure hatred across her face. I'll kill you. She growled. Crocodile just kept on walking before the room started flooding with water. Usopp started to freak out while Zoro snapped at him to shut up. My country or my friends? She whispered as tears filled her eyes. I know you have no intention of letting me have either. You'll have me killed before I could even leave the city. Nothing will stop unless you die. You know nothing. About the people, this country's history, nothing. She said as she stood up to attack, only to drop back to her knees in hopeless defeat and silently cry. Don't give up, VV. Luffy shouted. Stand up and fight. Get us out of here. Begging for your life? Crocodile asked as he stopped walking. I'm not surprised. Everyone fears death. If we die here, who's gonna kick his ass? Luffy roared. Everyone looked at him before Crocodile smirked at him with a dark look on his face. Don't flatter yourself, small fry. He said. You're the small fry. Luffy yelled. Crocodile only answered with a snap of his fingers, opening up another door and letting a banana gator into the room. If you're going to save your country, you better leave them and run, Miss Wednesday. Crocodile said. Don't you wish to stop the rebellion? Crocodile asked. VV stared up at the banana gator in horror as it glared down at her. It's huge. She gasped as she looked ready to fight. Johnny, Yasaku, Usopp, Nami, and OG-ko were now yelling in horror as they saw a line of them swimming towards them to eat them as the one in the room lunged at VV, missing her as it broke the stairs like they were nothing. VV. Run. Grace shouted before the gator smashed its tail into her side, sending her across the room. VV. Most of them shouted as it closed in on her, ready to eat her whole until it stopped at the sound of a den mushy going off. Incoming call. Robin said as they all looked at her as she answered. Yes. Hello. Hello? This thing on? Came a familiar voice. Sanji. Thought all the Straw Hats. I can hear you. Robin answered. This is the Millions, right? Glad I could get through. I've never used one of these baby den mushies before. Sanji's voice said as another told him he was using it correctly. What is it? Spit it out already. Crocodile demanded. I've heard that voice before. Thanks for calling Cafe La Shit. This about a reservation? Sanji said. Cafe La Shit? Crocodile asked. Glad you remember. Sanji said as Crocodile remembered the conversation at Little Garden. All of the Straw Hats except for one should be inside the cage. That must be you. He said. It may or may not be. Sanji said. Who is this? Crocodile demanded. Just call me Mr. Prince. Prince. Help us. Usopp shouted, along with some of the others. Sounds like you have some of my crew with you. Sanji said. Little pissant. Where are you? Crocodile said. Can't tell you that. You'd kill me. Sanji said. Both of them kept on talking until a gunshot was heard from Sanji's end. Beh. Cough bastard. Hey. This is Millions. Came another voice. We killed that Mr. Prince bastard. Sanji. Usopp screamed. Brother Cook. Johnny and Yasaku yelled in horror. That moron had to get caught. Zoro said in frustration. It's over. Nami said with tears in her eyes. After learning they were outside rain dinners, Crocodile smirked before leaving to take care of them, along with Robin. Shortly after, the banana gator went after Vivi again, but she managed to dodge and went for the stairs. As she struggled to get onto the stairs, she told them that she'd come back with Mr. Prince to save them, only for Crocodile to pull her back with his powers and knocking her to the floor, saying that if she loved her friends, she can die with them before stating that he'd be back with Mr. Prince's corpse. They've always been there for me. She whispered as she struggled to her feet. Come on big sis. You can do it. Yasaku yelled. Yeah, get up. Johnny shouted. I'll be there for them and I won't let them die. She said as the gator went for her but recoiled in pain after VV slashed its nose. Most of them were now shouting for her to go and cheering her on as the gator went for her again. It missed, but the impact caused the windows to crack, letting even more water in. Ah, cry up. Usopp yelled out dramatically. The water's pouring in now. We probably have only 20 minutes left. He then began to shout hysterically before Alvida smacked him with her club. Stop shouting already. She growled, angry that he was making too much noise. VV. Nojiko shouted. What are you doing? I'm going to get help. I'll be right back. I won't let you all die. She shouted back. Alright. Good luck. Most of them shouted as she ran up the stairs. She kept on running and hit her face with her robe as she tried to get to the exit. Did you hear? The bridge collapsed. One of the citizens said. What? Vivi whispered to herself. No. Now I can't get out to get help. It's not to keep you from getting out, said a voice. It's to keep Baroque Works from getting in. Vivi turned to see Sanji at a slot machine with a pair of orange-tinted shades covering his eyes. Sanji. She said in joy. Topper's outside acting as a decoy. Valerie-chan and the others are okay too. He said as he turned to her. Now, let's go help our friend's princess. But Chopper. Topper was running around in his human form while Crocodile was jazzing after him. He had been carrying out Sanji's plan to make it sound like the millions killed him to lure Crocodile out before Sanji destroyed the bridge, while he kept Crocodile busy by running around and shouting out, "I am Mr. Prince." He got out of Crocodile's sight long enough to shift to his a half and a half form, leaving Crocodile unaware of where he was. With Luffy's group. The water kept on rising as some of the Straw Hats were now getting panicky and scared. "Come and get me, you stupid croc," Nami shouted. "Nami? What are you doing?" Usopp shouted. "I'm getting that croc to bite down and break this cage," she said. Most of them liked that idea and started spouting off insults until it bit down on the cage. Unfortunately, the only thing that broke was all of its teeth. "What is this cage made of?" Usopp yelled. "Hey. All of you," Smoker said in a calm voice as he sat in the cage. "How are you calm? Help us out or something," Usopp yelled. "What do you know about Crocodile's plans?" Smoker asked. All of them looked at him as he continued. "That woman with him has been wanted by the world government for 20 years. Her bounty exceeds 70 million. 70 million? Usopp shrieked. 79 million to be exact, Johnny said as he fished out his collection of wanted posters and thumbed through them before pulling out Robin's. "This is her, right?" he asked as they all stared at a picture of an 8-year-old Robin. "Nico Robin is her name?" Alvida asked. "Where'd you get that?" "We kept all the wanted posters we had and now go around collecting more just in case we run into these guys," Yusaku answered. "It's so we can see if there are any threats on the islands we visit." "That's her alright," Smoker said. "What does that have to do with what's happening now?" Yusaku asked. "But those two working together, this has become much more than a takeover for this country," said Smoker. "If those two aren't stopped, then this could become a catastrophe that will engulf the world." "The world?" Nojiko asked in shock. You mean the world's gonna end?" Johnny and Yusaku yelled, jumping to conclusions. "Quit yelling," Nami shouted. "That doesn't matter," Luffy said. "I'm still gonna kick Crocodile's ass," he said. "Alright," Smoker said as he closed his eyes. "Then how do we get out of here?" "He's right," Gray said as she and Alvida sat on the bench next to Smoker. "The water keeps pouring in, VV and our friends are who knows where, and Crocodile's heading to Alubarna to finish his plans. If only I were a bit stronger, these bars would be nothing." Zoro grunted in frustration. "It's quite rude to be so rowdy at the table when you're eating," came Sanji's voice. Everyone stopped just in time to see the banana gator suddenly going skyward with a huge dent in its stomach. "Anti-manner kick course," he yelled as he sent the gator flying with a kick. The gator landed in the water as he turned to everyone in the cage. "Been waiting long?" "Alright, Mr. Prince." Luffy and Usopp yelled in relief as Johnny and Yusaku were dancing in a circle. "Brother Prince is here to save us." "Hey. Get the key to the cage," Zoro shouted. "Nami san, Alvida chwan no gkoh swan. Do you ladies love me?" Sanji yelled out as he danced around in love mode like a weird noodle. "Yes. We love you," they said in a monotone voice. "Now get the stupid key already." "Nice job, VV," Luffy yelled as he gave her a thumbs up. She smiled and gave a thumbs up right back as more banana gators started entering the room. "More ill-mannered reptiles, huh?" Sanji said as he raised his leg into the air. "You shitty bananas need to learn not to attack a lady. Hurry up and kick their asses already," Usopp shouted. "Take out the third one that just entered the room," Smoker said. "The third one?" Grace asked. "Why that one?" Alvida asked. "Are you all deaf or something?" Smoker sighed. "That one's growl is the same as the one that ate the key." They all stared at the gators as none of them could tell the difference, yet didn't care as Sanji sent it flying as a giant white ball flew out of its mouth. "What is that thing?" Zoro asked. "Wax wax ball crack," came a withered voice. Everyone was shocked to see a dried up Mr. 3 appear from the ball. "What? It's a miracle. I'm saved," he said as they all gaped at him. "It's that wax man," Alvida said. "Free guy," Luffy shouted. "What were you doing in the belly of a banana gator, Mr. 3? VV asked. "Why are you hiding behind me?" Smoker asked in annoyance as Grace was now sitting behind him. "And no reason," she stuttered as Mr. 3 drank enough water to rehydrate himself. "Ah. I'm revived," he shouted before grinning and talking to himself. "It'll take more than a banana gator to finish me off. Just before I got swallowed, I used the last of my strength to make a wax ball and protect myself," he said before noticing something stuck to the wax ball. "What's this? A key?" he asked as he brought a key to his face. "A key?" some of the Straw Hats asked before they started yelling at him to hand it over. Not you guys again," he shouted as his eyes bugged out at the sight of them before he registered what they said. "Wait. A flooding room, a steel cage, and a key," he thought before grinning. "So that's what's going on?" he said with a grin before freaking out at Sanji asking his name. "Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" he shouted. "In the key right now, wax man," Sanji said. "Okay," he said with a toothy grin before he pulled his arm back, ready to chuck the key far away. He stopped mid-throw as he felt a cold chill run up his spine. "Hey, 3. Luffy said. Mr. 3 didn't move as his eyes shifted to look at Luffy, who was glaring back with a fierce look in his eyes. "Give Sanji the key right now." Mr. 3 turned a little blue before he slowly gave Sanji the key. "Thanks," Sanji said as he put the key into the keyhole and turned it. "Huh?" he said when the cage wouldn't open. "Why won't this key work?" "What do you mean why won't this key work?" Nojiko said. "That's definitely the key that crocodile dropped. Isn't it obvious?" Smoker asked, causing everyone to look at him. "If it's not opening, then it's not the right key. Then we can't get out," Nami said in disbelief as Vivi fell to her knees on the stairs. "Crocodile," she thought, wondering how far he would go just to torture her like this. "Well, if it's the wrong key, then too bad," Mr. 3 said. "Guess you won't be getting out." "Asshole," Sanji growled. "Wait a sec. Sanji. Have that wax guy make a key with his powers," Usopp said. "Oh. That'll work," Sanji said as Mr. 3's grin dropped. After some convincing, Mr. 3 turned his finger into a key and opened the cage. "Thanks for the help." "Haha." Mr. 3 laughed with blood and bumps on his face as Sanji planted a note on his chest before kicking him across the room. "Alright, let's go. Crocodile will be back any moment," Sanji said. "We can get out using the same passageway Crocodile used," Nami said as they all got out of the cage. "But that way is filled with banana gators," Vivi exclaimed. "Bring it on. Is that all you bananas got?" Luffy yelled as he and Zoro were now standing on pile of beaten gators. "That's not a problem," Nami said. "Way to go, big bros." Johnny and Yosaku shouted in joyous unison. "They're starting to scare me," Gray said with a sweat drop on her head as Vivi turned away to cry in shame. "I couldn't even stand up to one of those things," she whimpered. "Hey, don't worry about it. Those two are just a bunch of monsters," Usopp said just as the walls cracked and the whole room flooded with water. Everyone was yelling and screaming as the water engulfed them all. But Crocodile. Crocodile had returned and was now walking back to the room at a brisk pace with Robin at his side. "I'm getting tired of all this," he grunted. "Suppose they found the right banana gator," Robin said. "Doesn't matter. Even if they found and beat the right one, I've got the real key right here," he said as he held up a key. "You're an evil man," she said with a small smile as they entered the room. "What is this?" Crocodile grunted in fury as he stared in a flooded room as the key fell out of his hand. The cage was open, the straw hats were gone, and Mr. 3 was floating with the help of a table with a note on his chest, "The tread so long, Sand Croc. Mr. Prince." With Luffy's group. Everyone was surfacing up in the lake one by one as Luffy and Alvida were dragged up by Sanji and Nojiko. Everyone was slowly coming to before Zoro came up with Smoker. "Would you save him? You should have just left him to drown," Sanji said. "Shut it, Cook," Zoro snapped. "I wanted to leave him there." "Ah, forget it," Sanji said. "Vivi-chan. Can we still make it?" "I don't know," she answered as they all began wringing the water out of their clothes before Sanji asked Nami to spray on some perfume. "Like this?" she asked as she sprayed it on herself, causing Sanji to instantly go into love mode. "Shut up, you dumbus," Zoro said before blocking Smoker's jut with his sword. "Baranoa," Smoker yelled. "Why did you save my life?" he demanded. Zoro told them he didn't want to. That it was Luffy's orders to do so before they all got washed away. "I see. Then you won't mind if I carry out my duties then?" he said. "Save a marine and they turn right around to arrest you," Sanji said. "Not cool, smoky guy," Johnny and Yosaku said as Luffy and Usopp finally came to. Luffy looked around before spotting Smoker. Both glared at each other as the sounds of marines yelling slowly go louder. "Oh," Smoker said. Everyone looked at him as he continued. "I'm letting you go this one time. That's it. Next time we meet, you're all dead." "You heard him. Let's go," Nojiko said as Zoro laughed. Everyone but Zoro and Luffy ran as Luffy kept staring at Smoker before grinning. "You're a good guy, Smokey," Luffy finally said with a laugh. Smoker was taken back by Luffy's words before he went red in the face and growled. "Get out of my sight," he roared before bringing his jut down and attacking Luffy. "He's mad. Let's go," Luffy said as he ran off. Zoro only smirked as he ran as well. Soon, everyone was running as Luffy ran in front of them all. "Alright. On to Alubarna." As the Straw Hats ran to get out of town, Smoker called of the hunt and ordered one of his men to call in reinforcements. When he was told about his superiors possibly denying the request, he snapped at him, saying that he didn't give two shits about what his superiors thought. But Luffy's group. All of them kept on arguing on how to get to Alubarna before they spotted the biggest crab any of them had ever seen. The crab? Usopp shouted as his eyes bugged out to mimic the crab's eyes. That's a moving crab. BV said. Look who's riding him. Yusaku beamed. Everyone looked to see Chopper holding some reins that were attached to the crab's giant mouth. Sitting next to him were Eyelash, Jin, Valerie, and Greg. All three Straw Hats looked banged up with bandages around them, with Greg and Jin sporting two huge lumps on their heads. As they all boarded the crab, Chopper explained that he's a friend of Eyelash's since he was born in this town and that his friend was also a bit of a perv. Glad to see you guys are alright. Johnny said. Yeah, but what happened to you three? Usopp added. We ran into Miss All Sunday. Valerie said in shame. We weren't a match for her. That bitch nearly broke my spine. Jin said. She did that to you three? No, Jiko said. She ate the Hana Hana fruit. Greg said as he nursed the giant bumps on his head. She can make any part of her body bloom like flowers on any surface. That explains the bone breaking, Gray said. But what's with the giant bumps? That's not her style. Blame him. Greg shouted as he pointed a finger at Sanji. He did this to us. Why would you do that? Chopper shouted hysterically, not hearing his part. When he found out we let VV get taken away, he kicked us. Jin grumbled. And when he found out that we tried to defend her by taking on Miss All Sunday, he kicked us again. Greg said. It's your fault for attacking a lady and for also letting VV Swan get taken away. Sanji said. That doesn't make any sense. Most of them shouted at Sanji. Wait a minute, where's Pell? VV asked. He went after you shortly after you were taken away. Valerie said. Anyway, we're wasting time talking. Zoro said. Let's get going. Right. Chopper said as he snapped the reins. Here we go. And just like that, they all took off at an amazing speed. All of them were enjoying the ride for a moment until. Ah! VV screamed as she found herself being pulled away by Crocodile's hook. Everyone looked on in horror as the hook was bringing her towards its owner. Chopper! Stop the crab! Zoro shouted. No. Keep going. Luffy shouted as he stretched over to her, got her out of the hook and threw VV back towards the others before they all took off. Luffy! They all shouted. I'll be fine. Go on ahead. Luffy shouted. Get VV to Alubarna. Promise me. Everyone was looking at him with mixtures of shock and horror, but one was of acceptance. Moron. Zoro said before turning to Chopper. Don't stop. No matter what. Right. Chopper said with tears in his eyes. You heard him, crab. Don't stop. He said as the crab continued onward despite the various protests from everyone else. We gotta go back for Luffy. VV yelled. Leave him. He'll be fine. Nami said. It's Crocodile who isn't gonna wake away from this fight. Yeah. Big Bro will show that stupid Sandman. Johnny yelled. Like Big Bro could lose to that guy. Yusaku yelled. VV, Zoro said. No matter what happens, you need to survive. If the rebels and Royal Army clash, Alabasta's done for. So from now on, no matter what happens to Luffy or any of us, you're the only one who can stop this war now. Nothing else matters. Boss head's right for once. Sanji said. You started this fight against a powerful and corrupt organization, but don't think for a second that you have to fight alone anymore. VV's eyes widened at that before shouting at Luffy. Luffy? We'll wait for you in Alubarna. Yeah. Luffy yelled back. Looks like the princess got away. Robin said with a smile. No matter. The agents are in place in Alubarna. Crocodile said as he glared down at Luffy. Straw Hat, I'd say you've taken this nonsense a little too far. VV doesn't think it's nonsense. Luffy said as he sat up and removed the blue scarf from his head before throwing his robe off. Unlike most people, VV truly cares about others. Deep down, she's an optimist who believes that nobody in this revolt needs to die. No one needs to die? Crocodile asked in slight amusement with a smirk. That's the problem with idealists like Princess VV. They take a stand without any comprehension of what is truly involved in a real fight. Am I right? Yeah, you're right. Luffy said as he glared at Crocodile. Still, it won't change the fact that as long as you're around, VV'll fight until she either wins or dies trying. And since neither me or my friends want her to die, I'm gonna kick your ass all over this desert. Fool. Crocodile said with a smirk. Despite what the idealists cry about, there's always one constant truth. On the rough battlefields of life, you either kill or die. Which is why I'll gladly put a bullet through every bleeding heart I meet. Luffy only smirked before cracking his knuckles. Then you're a bigger fool. He said, causing Crocodile to get angry and bite his cigar in half. Robin chuckled slightly at his comment, causing Crocodile to side-eye her. "Do you think this is amusing?" he asked in a dangerous voice. "Maybe you'd like to keep him company on his journey to the afterlife, Nico Robin. Bill me if you wish," she said as she walked away. "And didn't we agree that you'd never call me by that name?" "Where are you going?" he asked. "Barna. See you there," she said. "I'll never understand what goes through that woman's head," Crocodile said as he reached into his coat, pulled out a tiny Herglass, and threw it at Luffy's feet. Luffy glanced down at it as Crocodile spoke. "I've got 3 minutes to spare," he said. "After that, I won't have any more time to waste on you." The wind blew past them as Luffy glared at Crocodile. "Your 3 minutes are counting down. It's your move, kid," he said as he raised his hook. "Alright," Luffy said as he raised his fist over his shoulder. "I won't hold back," he said as he thrust his arm to the side, causing the blood to pump over before going back and causing his body to steam as his skin turned red. "Gear. Second." Crocodile raised an eyebrow at his red skin before Luffy aimed at him. "Gum-gum," he said. "Heh. You hate me so much, you're turning red all over from anger, rubber boy," Crocodile said. "Jet pistol," he cried out as he aimed the punch at Crocodile's gut. Before Crocodile knew what had happened, he suddenly found himself skidding across the desert dunes before stopping. What the Crocodile thought as he staggered to get up before he coughed up some blood. "He actually hit me, how?" he thought as he glared at Luffy before his eyes widened at him, or rather, his blackened knuckles. "That's hockey," he thought as he got to his feet as Luffy returned to normal. "Hockey all the way out here near the beginning of the Grand Line," he thought. "You're no ordinary rookie. And you're not as unbeatable as everyone claims you are," Luffy said with a grin. Crocodile just glared at him as a vein stood out of his forehead. "Don't get cocky, brat," he growled. "You may have hockey, but it'll take more than that to defeat me," he said as he got to his feet and formed a blade of sand out of his hand. "Desert Spada," he cried out as he sent a blade of sand out along the ground and speeding towards Luffy. Luffy only watched as it got closer before calmly turning to his side and letting the attack go right by, leaving nothing but a deep ravine in the sand. Luffy only smiled as he glared while running towards Crocodile. "Armament and observation hockey," he thought. Stamp," he cried out as he sent his foot towards Crocodile, only for Crocodile to dodge before swiping at Luffy's leg with his hand. "Crescent cutlass," he yelled as a crescent-shaped bit of sand swiped Luffy's leg before Luffy rolled away from Crocodile and yelled in pain. "Ah. My leg's a mummy," he shrieked before glaring at Crocodile. "Crap. I got careless," he thought before doing his best to fumble towards his cloak and reaching for the water barrel. He then began to drink from it before his leg returned to normal. "That's better." "Desert Girasol," Crocodile yelled as area of sand around Luffy suddenly sunk in and started disappearing under him. "Yikes," Luffy yelled as he started sinking before breaking into a mad sprint to get out. "I'm guessing you're not a fan of quicksand. It makes for a convenient desert burial when you want someone to disappear. The sand is sinking into the underground waterways, which I happen to have the good fortune of being able to detect with my powers," Crocodile said as he wiped the blood from his mouth. "That alone makes me unbeatable in the desert. It's gonna take more than a bunch of stupid sand to beat me," Luffy yelled before he started jumping up into the air before falling a safe distance away. "Heh. Well, aren't you full of surprises?" Crocodile said before speeding towards Luffy, ready to impale him with his hook. Luffy bent backwards to avoid it before aiming a kick at Crocodile's ribs, nailing him hard and sending him skyward before he fell back down onto the sand. "Yeah," Luffy said as he raised his fists. "And each one's ready to help me kick your sandy ass," he said before a sandstorm kicked up around them. "Shame that you don't have any more time to try them," Crocodile said as the last grain of sand fell in the Herglass. Luffy glared at him as the sandstorm from Crocodile's hand grew larger as Crocodile closed his eyes as the wind whipped around them all. "The desert wind feels nice. Very dry," he said before glaring at Luffy. "Listen carefully. The prevailing winds always blow from north to south. And if this infantile sandstorm were to catch on to this wind, where do you think it would hit?" he asked. Luffy only glared at him as Crocodile smirked. "It seems you know exactly where it would hit, Yuba." "Leave that old guy alone," Luffy said in a growl. "He's got nothing to do with our fight." Crocodile only smiled at him as the sandstorm grew and started blowing south. "Look. It started," Crocodile said. "Yuba's fate is already sealed. That sandstorm will gather strength. Soon, even I won't be able to stop it," he said before closing his eyes and smiling. "Yuba is finished. I told you to stop that storm," Luffy bellowed as a massive wave of haki burst from inside him, which wiped the smile from Crocodile's face as it was replaced with a look of shock and fear. "He even knows that form of haki," he thought before he felt a fist in his gut, sending him back before Luffy ran towards him again, screaming in fury as he took a swung at him, only for Crocodile to turn into sand and disappear. "Where are you, you bastard?" Luffy roared as he looked around wildly before his eyes widened and he stared off at nothing. Soon, nothing could be heard except for the sound of a steady drip as Luffy's body was slightly hoisted into the air with a hook through his stomach. "I commend you on your strength," Crocodile said. "But, it seems that it has done nothing to keep you alive. You lose, Straw Hat," Crocodile said. Luffy just hung there on Crocodile's hook before his hand suddenly flew up and grabbed Crocodile's hook. "What?" he cried out before Luffy brought his foot up and slammed it backwards into Crocodile's stomach, causing Crocodile to take a few steps back as Luffy pulled himself off of his hook. Luffy stumbled around as he turned at Crocodile, not noticing that he was getting too close to the quicksand before sliding down into the center and quickly disappearing. He struggled to stay up, but it was hard to run with a hole in his gut. Crocodile looked down as Luffy struggled in vain. "This is the price you pay for fighting someone else's battle," he said. "If you had rid yourself of the hindrance called friendship, you may have lived a long life," he said with a smirk before disappearing into sand. "Farewell, bastard," Luffy growled as he kept trying. He let Crocodile get to him again by his threat to Yuba, losing his haki for a split second and letting Crocodile get him. He kept trying to get out, only to find himself up to his neck in sand. Right before his head was swallowed up, he screamed to the heavens, "Meat, meat, meat." Luffy's crew were speeding through the desert towards Alubarna on the back of Scissors the Crab, hoping to get there in time to stop the war. Usopp was telling Chopper a story, Nami and Nojiko were staying quiet, Zoro was having Valerie and Eyelash sit on two of his swords as he lifted them like makeshift weights, and the rest of them were starting to get frustrated. Soon, most of them were at each other's throats before VV diffused the situation and calmed everyone down before they kept on going until they learned the awful truth. "What do you mean this crab can't survive in water?" Usopp roared. "It's a crab. Moving crabs are animals of the land. They can't swim," VV explained. "Then we have a major problem," Usopp said as he pulled out a map of Alabasta and pointed to the Sandarin River. "If we can't cross this river, we'll never make it to Alubarna. And we also have little time to try and think of a way across," Sanji said. "The Sandarin River's in sight." Everyone turned to see that they were indeed approaching the river. Some of them were beginning to panic as they tried to have Scissors do something to get across. They got something when Chopper told them that Scissors likes dancer girls, which resulted in Nami, Nojiko, Alvida, and Valerie to all show off their dancer girl outfits. Sanji and Eyelash were already smitten, Scissors looked them and grew hearts in his eyes, and Zoro commented about how they had more animals in heat before Scissors picked up speed and, to their amazement, began running on the water. "Oh big bro Scissors," Johnny and Yasaku yelled. "Alright. At this speed, we'll make it there in no time," Usopp said before his good mood slowly faded as the crab slowly sunk after a bit of running. "Ahhh. It's sinking," he shouted before they all submerged. One by one, with those who had devil fruit powers getting a little help from the others, they all resurfaced before continuing on until they met a Sandarin catfish. "They're very rare and love human flesh," VV shouted out. "Stop forgetting these things," Usopp shrieked before the catfish's eyes went all crazy before it was flung into the air. Everyone was stunned to see that the catfish was beaten by a familiar group of friends. "Kung Fu dugongs," Usopp cried out before they all got on the catfish as the dugongs floated them all swiftly to the other side. "Thank you," VV said as she and Chopper waved them goodbye before they all started discussing how they would get to Alubarna now before they noticed a dust cloud approaching them. "Look at that," Nami cried out. "Is it the enemy? Oh no. They found us already," Usopp shrieked. "Wait. I know that sound," VV said as the dust cleared and showed Karu and a group of 6 other ducks following him. "Karu. The supersonic duck squad," she said. She explained who they were to the other crew members before they all somehow boarded them and Eyelash before heading off to Alubarna. With Luffy. Luffy was still stuck in the sand, staring at the darkened sky in anger, both at Crocodile's words and actions, and himself for letting himself get beaten again. He kept on trying to get out before the sound of crunching sand caught his attention, before he was lifted into the air by a multitude of hands. He was set down away from the quicksand pit with a bit of labored breathing as he looked over at a familiar face. "Thank you," he said when he saw Robin. Robin only looked down at him as he lay there, covered in blood. "Why do you fight?" she asked. "You with the name of D. Luffy asked, never truly understanding what she was asking. He could actually hurt Crocodile without water, she thought. She was watching the whole fight from a safe distance and was surprised by this rookie who had fought toe-to-toe with a warlord. And that strange power he released. "Why do you fight? What is your intention?" she thought before sighing. "It seems you don't know what I'm talking about." "I found you," came another voice. She looked over while another hand retrieved his straw hat and threw it to her as Pell was slowly staggering towards her. My, Up and about already, are we? She asked with a smile. I've studied your powers. This won't end like last time. He shouted as he got ready to fight her. Robin only smiled as she threw Luffy's hat onto his chest. Careful pal. Wouldn't want to hurt yourself. Instead of fighting a losing battle, why not help that boy there? She said as she approached a different kind of banana gator. He is, after all, the brave knight that returned your country's princess safely back home. Pell only looked down at Luffy in surprise as Robin continued talking as she mounted the gator. You must be happy to know that she's safe. Still, it's a long way to Alubarna and anything can happen. And with that, the gator dashed off, leaving nothing but a trail of dust before it was gone. Pell only glared at the direction she went before he fell to his knees. He kept on glaring until he felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Luffy standing and staring in the same direction Robin went. I need meat. He said as blood still came out of him. You don't need meat. You need a doctor. Pell said as he struggled to get up. No time need meat can't let crocodile win. Luffy said as he glared while remembering the fight. He insulted VV and the nice old man with a shovel. He's gonna pay. He said. Who is this boy? Pell thought. Meanwhile, everyone was now heading towards Alubarna, where Baroque works were lying in wait to stop VV and the Straw Hats. The Mr. 1 pair, Mr. 2, and the Mr. 4 pair were all waiting for VV to arrive to do away with her if their boredom and dislike for each other didn't cause them to kill each other first. They kept talking until Mr. 4 spotted them and pointed into the desert. Here.they.come, he said in a slow and stretched out voice. What? Why didn't you say so in the first place? Snapped his partner, Miss Merry Christmas as she pushed him away and was now looking through the binoculars. They're all on ducks. Ducks? Miss Doublefinger asked as they began arguing about the number that were supposed to be there. It matters not how many there are. Mr. 1 said in a bored but serious tone. All that we have to do is kill Princess VV. How hard can that be? Is that so? Miss Merry Christmas said. Since VV's the only one we're after, how about you tell us which one she is? She screamed. Everyone looked to see that all the riders and passengers on the ducks were all wearing white full-body cloaks with hoods, hiding who they were. Ahhh. They're all the same. Mr. 2 shouted in surprise, while Mr. 1 scowled in irritation. Worse. Those are the fastest creatures in the whole kingdom. Supersonic ducks. Miss Doublefinger added before Mr. 2 shouted that it was unfair to use a trick like that. Soon, all of the ducks split off into groups of 2, with one heading for the west gate, one to the southwest gate, and one to the south gate, with the Baroque Works team splitting up as well to chase them. They kept on going until they were deep in the city or in the desert before they all turned to them and threw off their cloaks. The Mr.1 pair chased Zoro, Nami, Nojiko, and Grace. Mr. 2 chased Usopp, Eyelash, Greg, Johnny, and Yusaku. The Mr. 4 pair chased Chopper, Sanji, Jin, Alvida, and Valerie. Too bad. Wanna try again? All the Straw Hats said with cocky smiles. What? Shouted most of the agents as VV was silently thanking them before riding off on Karu to stop the rebel army while thinking of all her friends and loved ones. Now she stood there between Alubarna and the approaching rebel army, waiting for them to arrive to tell them all that it's all a lie. Hoza saw her for a split second before a cannonball exploded in front of her, courtesy of a Baroque Works Billions man posing as a guard, kicking up the sand and rendering VV's cries useless as the shouting of the rebel army drowned her out. She kept on shouting before realizing that Koza had passed her and was now leading them all to battle before she was knocked to the ground, with the rebels nearly trampling her. The rebels kept on going until they reached the southern entrance to Alubarna and began to fight. The final battle in the country of sand, Alabasta, had begun. But VV struggled and moved out from under Karu's wing before staring at him in horror. Karu? She said in a sad voice. You shielded me from them. She said as her eyes welled up. We were so close and yet the rebellion has started. I'm so sorry. But I will stop it. She said with determination as she trembled. No matter how many times they ignore me or how loud I have to scream. I refuse to let senseless killing tear apart this country of ours. That's what I learned on that ship. Never give up. VV. Came a voice. VV turned to see Johnny approach her on a horse. Glad I found you. Johnny. She said in a happy voice. Come on. Hop on. We can still stop this. He said. VV nodded and tried to help Karu up but stopped at Johnny's next words. Forget the bird. He's done for. Johnny kept on talking, not seeing VV deep in thought. That bird. VV. She thought. Dance with us, brother duck. You too big sis VV. Ha ha ha. Prove to me you are Johnny. VV demanded. You're doubting me? He asked with a laugh before showing her the white bandage on his left arm. See? No. She thought as she looked at him in horror. Inside Alubarna. Hey. Wake up. What happened to you guys? Sanji asked as he looked at Usopp, Eyelash, Greg, Johnny, and Yusaku on the ground and beaten black and blue. Simple. The plan to lure one of them away was a success. Usopp said. Then MR.2 whipped us in 5 seconds. Are you guys serious? He asked with a tick mark on his forehead. Why are you here, brother cook? Yusaku asked through swollen lips. Sanji explained that the ducks brought him there to help them. MR.2 got away, didn't he? Sanji asked. Yeah. Usopp said in shame. I guess I still couldn't take him on. Greg mumbled as Sanji glared off in the distance. Rotten jerk stole my shades. Johnny thought. Alright you guys. Find VV and help stop this rebellion. Sanji said before taking off. Right. They all said before separating and going off to help however they could. But VV. VV stared at Johnny in horror as the fighting continued before finding her voice. You're not Johnny. She said. Johnny only responded with a dark grin before touching his left cheek, revealing himself to be Mr. 2. I must ask, how did you see through my perfect imitation? He asked with a grin as he lifted Johnny's glasses up to his forehead. I even had a bandage on my left arm, so how? He asked before throwing off his robe, revealing his usual attire with Johnny's sunglasses on top of his head. Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Since you're about to die. He said before aiming a kick at her. She dodged, but he kicked at her again, this time missing due to Karu helping her up and running towards Alubarna. Mr. 2 only grinned before dashing towards her at a fast pace. Karu kept on running before swerving and heading towards a sheer wall of rock and doing the unbelievable in running up the wall, only to gently float away. As he did, he struggled to try and fly back to the wall, as images of the Straw Hats claiming their friendship went through his head before he managed to hold onto the wall. How'd he do that? Karu? You flew. VV said as she looked down. Now Mr. 2 can't, she said, but stopped and looked in horror to see Mr. 2 running up the cliff as well after them. Karu pulled himself up with VV still riding him to a scene that broke VV's heart. Before them were her people slaughtering each other as bodies dropped and explosions rocked the area. Karu 2. You think you can run through all this? She asked in a quiet voice. Karu quacked, saying he could. Alright. We can't find leader, but we can still find Chaka. We must get to the royal palace before the rebels get to the center of the city. She said before they took off before a stray bullet struck Karu. Karu no. VV shouted. Karu looked ready to drop but kept on running with Mr. 2 right behind them. He ran until his strength ran out and dropped to the dirt. VV only looked at Karu with tears in her eyes as Karu quacked, telling her to go on. Your mine, Mr. 2 cried out as he prepared to kill them both, only for 2 other ducks to appear out of nowhere and kick him away. At ease, Captain Karu. Sanji said. You've done a fine job protecting VV. Sanji. VV cried in joy as he straightened his tie. You ducks get Karu out of here. I'll be fighting this freak. He said. Both of them nodded and carried Karu to safety as VV fled. What? VV's getting away. Don't joke, ruined. If you're going to interfere, then I'll kill you as well. Mr. 2 said as he kicked at Sanji, who had dropped his glasses and blocked it with a kick of his own. You have a pair of shades that belongs to one of my friends. I'd appreciate it if you gave them back before I kick your ass. Sanji said. Friend, huh? So you're friends with the Straw Hats then? Mr. 2 asked. Then you must be Mr. Prince then. My name's Sanji. I'm a first-rate cook. He said. Okay. Well, I'm a first-rate ballerina and a member of a criminal organization. Mr. 2 said as he got into a fighting position. The criminal world is no stranger to me. Sanji said as he blew out some smoke. I'm a cook and empired. Iraday. Mr. 2 said with a grin. Then this is gonna be fun. But Zoro's group. Zoro, Nami, Nojiko, and Grace were against Mr. 1 and Miss Doublefinger. Zoro was ahead of the rest while Nami, Nojiko, and Grace were behind rooting for him, ready to help when they could. Bring it then. Zoro said as he flicked out a blade while his opponents walked towards him, then right past him, causing the cheering to stop. Rule number 1 of assassination. Take out the weak ones first. Mr. 1 said. Let us show you how a professional does it. Miss Doublefinger said with a smile, causing the girls to laugh before fleeing in fear. But Chopper in the desert. Usopp had arrived into the desert to assist Chopper's group as he looked around before finding Chopper, Valerie, Jin, and Alvida lying in the desert and running towards them. Eyes. What happened? Stay with me. He said as he shook Chopper awake. Usopp. Chopper said as Usopp started waking the others. As they all got up, Usopp asked where they were before proclaiming in a brave fashion that they must have seen him coming before running off, only to cower in fear after Chopper told them they were still here. What's happening? Usopp screamed as the ruins around them began to crumble into the sand. They're underground. Chopper said. This Merry Christmas. She ate the mole fruit and became a mole woman. Valerie explained. She's dangerous in the desert. And from what I can tell from her bragging earlier, Jin said. Her partner, Mr. Four, is what she called a fourth batter. Plus, they have a dog gun that shoots exploding baseballs. Alvida said. Can't deflect explosions unfortunately. She muttered to herself. Could you guys try to make some sense? Usopp shouted before an exploding baseball came towards them. Incoming. Valerie shouted before they all jumped out of the way, only for it to come back at them, thanks to Mr. Four popping out of a hole and hitting it back at them. They managed to dodge again before it exploded. What was that? Usopp yelled. The ones who were there before he got there began to explain about the time bombs, Mr. Four's unnatural strength, and his dog before Miss Merry Christmas explained that it was a gun who ate the Dashin model of the dog fruit. Wait a second. How can a gun eat a devil fruit? Jin asked. Yeah. That's gotta be a lie. How can a gun eat anything, including a devil fruit? Usopp said. Shut up. It ate one and became a gun dog. So there. So there. Miss Merry Christmas yelled. It's a new technique here on the Grand Line. Not that I'm gonna tell you about it since you're all gonna die. She said as she began to change. Welcome to our turf. Molehill number 4. Ah. She's changing. Usopp yelled before she changed to her half and a half form. What's that? A penguin? I'm a mole, you moron. She yelled before diving into the sand. All three groups of Straw Hats and Baroque Works agents began their fights. Nice thinking, Chopper. Alvida said as they all stared at the smoke cloud before a silhouette could be seen in the smoke. These guys are tough. Jin said as he stood up. No way. Usopp shouted as he took off. Usopp. Stop. Chopper shouted. Get your ass back here. Jin shouted. No way. We can't beat these guys. We even have numbers, but they just won't stay down. He shouted. You can't run. Chopper shouted. He's right, you know. Said the mole woman as she rose from the sand and grabbed his ankles. After pissing us off like that, no way are we gonna let any of you morons go. She said as Usopp tried to get away. All of you weak little morons are doomed to die here. Not surprised, seeing how weak your captain is. All of them stared at her after she said that as Usopp quit struggling. What do you mean? He asked. What do you know about Luffy? That brat in the straw hat? She asked before grinning. I know that he's already dead. All of the straw hats around there stared in disbelief. Luffy's dead? Chopper asked in a weak voice. That's right. Heard about it not too long ago. She continued. Still, from what I heard, he got a few hits in, but not enough to stop our boss. What a weak-ass runt. Don't you lie to us. Usopp shouted in anger as he and the others glared at her. I'm not gonna stand around and listen to you lie like that. No way is Luffy just gonna up and die. Oh really? She asked. And why's that? Because he's gonna become king of the pirates one day. So shut your mouth. He yelled. Both Baroque Works agents looked at him before they started laughing. The FFFT, ha 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 ha. Pirate King. You hear that, Mr. Four? Pirate King. Piking. She ranted as Mr. Four laughed while the others glared daggers at them. I'm glad he's dead. People like him and you lot who believe things like that are morons. She said before she started laughing. All of them were now feeling rage at her words. Each and every one of them were now either tightly gripping their weapons or curling their hands into white-knuckled fists at her words. You don't know anything at all. Jin finally shouted as Valerie floated down and joined her friends. That's right. Usopp agreed before he was dragged across the desert, yet he still kept talking. No matter who it is or how strong a foe or obstacle is, he said before he was smashed through a wall. Usopp. You okay? Chopper shouted. No matter how great the odds are against him. He mumbled out loud. You're up, Mr. Four. She shouted. Mr. Four got into his batting stance. Shit. He'll die if they use that. Valerie shouted as they all started running towards Mr. Four. Will. She shouted as she dragged Usopp within range before Mr. Four hit Usopp in the head with his bat. Interception number 4. Low went Usopp as he coughed up blood while he was soaring through the air. Usopp. Long nose. They cried as Usopp plummeted and slammed back into the sand. You bastards. Chopper snarled as they all got ready to fight. Oh, miss your friend already? Miss Merry Christmas said. Don't worry. You punks are next. All of them just glared at her before they heard someone grunting. There comes a time in someone's life where they cannot run from a fight. Came Usopp's voice from the sand cloud. Everyone stared in shock as they all saw Usopp standing, despite his bleeding head. That time is when a friend's dream is laughed at. You took a 4-ton to the head and you're still alive. Shouted the mole woman. No way. You dirty Ron. What trick did you pull this time? Luffy isn't dead, he's gonna be king of the pirates someday. Usopp said before shouting. And I won't sit back and let you laugh at his dream. Neither will we. Alvida said as she and the others were smiling, ready for round 2. Heh. We'll see about that. Miss Merry Christmas said before diving into the sand. Let's go again Mr. 4. She shouted as Mr. 4 got his bat ready. She grabbed Usopp by the ankles and guided him towards Mr. 4, ready to smash his head into pieces. Chopper. Get behind me. Usopp shouted as he put his goggles over his eyes and drew his slingshot. Right. Chopper said as he ran behind them in his horn point. Special attack. Smoke star. Usopp shouted as he shot a smoke star at Mr. 4, blinding him before slipping out of his shoes. You're up Chopper. He shouted before rolling away, leaving Chopper to dig her out of the sand and trap her in his antlers right to Mr. 4. Molehill. Interception number 4. Usopp called out, imitating Miss Merry Christmas. No. Wait. Stop. You're gonna hit she cried out before Mr. 4's bat slammed into her face, sending her flying away and into some ruins. Poor Mr. 4 said in confusion. Not done yet. Came Valerie's voice. While Mr. 4 was blinded, Jin and Valerie had locked arms as he began swinging her around at high speeds as she increased her weight. The speed at which he was swinging her had kicked up the sand a little until he was going fast enough. 10,000 kilo. Hammer toss. Jin finished as he launched her directly at Mr. 4, slamming into his gut and knocking him into lasso before they all smashed in some ruins next to Miss Merry Christmas. Valerie got up and walked away as Lasso coughed up one last bomb, which detonated after a few moments. Nice toss. Valerie said. Heh. Was all Jin said with a small grin. We did it. Usopp said before collapsing. AHHH. Usopp. Shouted Chopper. Doctor. We need a doctor. That's you. Alvida said. Inside Elubarna. Vivi was running through the streets towards the north block where the palace and a number of guards were. She was stopped by some guards but was let through when they discovered who she was. Arriving at the palace, she went towards Chaka and gave him an outrageous request. To destroy the palace. That's insane. Chaka protested. How so? She said with a determined look. Do you believe that destroying the palace will destroy this country? No. This country she said is thoughts of all the people that she met on the way here. This country is its people. Chaka stood there while the rest of the guards protested. Their words weren't heard as Chaka was remembering what Cobra had told him before, which was exactly what Vivi had told him just now. He closed his eyes before kneeling before her. It shall be done. Greg and Grace were running around town, looking for other Straw Hats to help or clashes they could stop with their abilities. Halt! Shouted a group of royal soldiers as they blocked their path. Who are you two? Are you rebels? No. We're not rebels. Greg said. Don't listen to them. All the civilians have been evacuated, said one of the soldiers. If they're here, then they must be rebels. Deciding not to take any chances, the soldiers charged towards them. We tried being nice. Greg said as he picked his nose. Minus 30 seconds later. All the royal soldiers were now on the ground, alive but barely conscious as Greg and Grace started walking away. The bastard. One of the soldiers mumbled. Stupid traitors. Traitors? Both of them thought before walking over to him and kneeling down to him. What do you mean traitors? Grace asked. And nothing. He mumbled. Just talking to myself. Right. Greg said, clearly not believing him as he picked him up by his cloak and pulling up his sleeves, revealing the symbol for Baroque works on his arm. Ah. Billions, huh? Mind telling me why you're fighting in the Royal Army? Screw you Mr. 5. Grunted the Billions as he spat some blood on Greg's face. Greg's looked ready to literally explode before Grace cut in. If I may Greg. She said as she painted a symbol on the man's cheek. Colors trap. Friendly yellow-green. Now, care to tell us what's going on? Of course. Said the Billions with a smile on his face and a strange cheery attitude. It's simple. The boss put some Billions within the ranks of both armies to keep the fighting going or to report if anything or anyone were to try and stop the rebellion from happening. Shit. This isn't good. Greg said. So even if VV tried to stop them, all they would have to do is shoot her and claim it was an accident or some other shit. Precisely. Said the man with the same smile. There is something else happening, but the Mr. 7 pair were mum about it. The Mr. 7 pair? Grace asked. Why are they here? Don't know, but they're in the clock tower if you want to ask them. Said the man. Thanks. You've been a big help. Greg said before throwing a bomb punch into the man's gut, blasting him into a wall before he and Grace took off. Mr. 7 and Miss Father's Day. Those two are snipers, what's Crocodile gonna have them do? But Sanji. Sanji was fighting against Mr. 2 and his ballet Kenpo, matching Sanji kick for kick before both struck each other, sending both fighters into separate buildings. Both got up before Sanji began a barrage of kicks, each one dodged or blocked by Mr. Two, before they both charged each other again, resulting in both being slammed into separate buildings once more. Enough. Time for you to see my true power. Mr. Two said. Care to know a secret? My perfect memory lets me remember all the faces I've seen. He said before covering his face with both hands. Prepare to witness a montage the likes of which will leave you defenseless in laughter. He shouted before slowly changing his face. First, the weirdest head. Then, the weirdest eyes. The weirdest nose. The weirdest mouth. Now. He cried out dramatically. Behold the grand performance. He sang out. Copy copy. Montage. He said while laughing, showing off his face with only a longer nose. Both of them stayed quiet for a few moments before Mr. Two fell into a depressed slump and looked down at a broken mirror. 90% of that was your own face. Sanji said before kicking him away. Stop screwing around. Have you no blood or tears, you monster? Mr. Two cried out. I've had enough of your tricks. Sanji said. Tricks? Mr. Two said as he began to rant about a friend long ago while Sanji lit a cigarette before Mr. Two turned into Usopp. Care to strike me? No, he said before Sanji planted his foot in his face. That was the face of your friend. You would dare hurt a friend of yours? Moron. Change into anyone you want, you're still you underneath. Sanji said. I'm not someone who's fooled by the surface. He said before pointing a thumb at his chest. People are hard. Hard? Mr. Two asked after backing away on the ground. He's so pure. I'm so ashamed to have taken on your friend's form. He said. Even if I were to, he said before changing into Nami, causing Sanji to go all love mode. Change into her or any of your friends, it wouldn't have any effect on you at all. He said before changing back and looking at Sanji, who was staring back with a blank look before Mr. Two switched to Nami, making Sanji turn to love mode, then normal. Easy. He thought before changing back and forth between Nami and himself, making Sanji go love mode then normal. Way too easy. He thought before doing it again, getting the same result. So unbelievably easy. He thought before switching to Nami. Silly boy. He said as Nami. Needless to say, Sanji was now on the ass end of an ass kicking as he was unable to attack whenever Mr. Two changed to Nami. All talk. That's what you are. He said as Nami while standing on top of Sanji. Asshole. Don't think I'll just lie down here and take it. Sanji thought as he started getting back up. I'm gonna kick your ass, you ballet basse ah. He said as he saw Mr. Two as Nami defending himself, making Sanji go all love mode. Mr. Two began to laugh and dance while Sanji cried. I just can't do it. He thought. Ah. So hot. He said as Nami as he began to open his vest. This desert air is killing me. Maybe I should strip off these stuffy clothes. I can help. Sanji shouted with his eye shooting out as a heart. LH up. He cried out, smacking his eye away. My eyes. Sanji cried out. FOOL Mr. Two shouted as himself as he kicked Sanji in the face with both feet. Kiri point. He shouted as he left Sanji in a pile of rubble before jumping back and spinning around on one foot while laughing. You really are all talk. He said before Sanji kicked all the debris away from him, stopping Mr. Two's laughter before a grin appeared on his face as Sanji charged him. He then peeled the makeup off from under his eyes before throwing it at Sanji. Mascara boomerang. He called out. Sanji dodged them and jumped above him, ready to kick him before he changed to Nami. Please don't kick me. He said, making Sanji stop in his attack before he was cut with Mr. Two's mascara, which promptly returned to his face. Back where they belong. He said before changing into Nami once more. It's been fun, but I'm afraid I can't toy with you any longer. We have orders to kill the princess after all. Now, it's time for you to die. He said before he began to spin at high speeds, not knowing that Sanji had seen through his abilities. Memories of a summer's day. Bone Clay cried out, only to be kicked away by Sanji. I've seen through your ability. Sanji said. Have you now? Mr. Two demanded in anger. And what flaw in my ability do you think you've seen? You can't use your ballet kenpo in Nami's body. Sanji said, making Mr. Two pause as he continued. I can't attack you while you're Nami, but the moment you attack, you change back by touching your left cheek with your hand. Right. Sanji said with a smile before it was wiped off by Bone Clay's laughter. What? You say something? Mr. Two asked with a bit of sweat on his forehead. Yep. I was right. Sanji said. Fine. Mr. Two shouted as he did some poses. It's true. I can only use my ballet kenpo with my own body that I've sculpted through many a day of training. Still, that matters not. You're close to dying anyway. But since you're alive, watch this. He said as he took the swan figures off his coat and placed them onto his shoes. Ballet kenpo. Prima. And just so you know. The one on your left is female and the one on your right is male. I don't give a shit. Sanji said with a tick mark on his head. Mr. Two only laughed before telling him it didn't matter before attacking him, narrowly avoiding the kick before seeing it pierce the wall of a building. Oh shit. That thing went through the wall. He thought as Mr. Two laughed and told him it was smart for dodging before bringing the swan head back out as he told him that the beak at the end of the swan was metal. There aren't any cracks around that hole. By putting all my power into a single point, I can avoid senseless destruction. He said. One kick is as powerful as a shot from a rifle, though the bullet is larger than normal. Now, hold still while I fill you full of holes. He shouted as he began to attack. His first 2 kicks were dodged, but his third kick hit Sanji, sending him flying back. Shit. His reach has increased. Sanji thought as he struggled to stand while Mr. Two jumped into the air and began to spin. Memories of a winter sky. He called out as Sanji lit a cigarette. His reach has gotten longer, but so has the time it takes for him to get back into an attack stance. He said as he puffed on his cigarette. All I have to do is avoid the first kick, then take him down with speed. He said as Mr. Two launched his attack. He dodged it by jumping straight above him as he readied his attack. Haha. Mr. Two laughed as he changed into Nami. What you gonna do now? Hey, you have something on your left cheek. Sanji said. Really? Mr. Two asked as he touched his left cheek, changing back into himself, allowing Sanji to attack. Aces coats. Sanji yelled as he kicked Mr. Two away before quickly following up with a kick to his back. Lunge. Then another kick to his neck. Tendron. He tried to get another kick in, but couldn't reach when Mr. Two launched a kick first, with the beak slamming into Sanji's chest, pushing him back. Both were now attacking while doing a strange down on their hands as they exchange a multitude of kicks each before they were both skidding away from each other. After quickly recovering, both were at it once again with more ferocity as they kicked, dodged, and blocked each other's attack until they were both sent flying again. Each fighter was now struggling to get up as they both spat up blood and stood up, despite the fact that both of them felt their bones breaking from just trying to stand. They glared at each other before rushing each other for one final attack. Bow shot. Bombardier Arabesque. Both of them were now standing before Sanji fell to his knees, while Mr. Two was sent spiraling into a wall before falling down in defeat, with Sanji falling down afterwards. Moments passed before Sanji slowly got up, lit a cigarette, and began to walk away before hearing Bone Clay grunt. You still alive? Sanji asked as he stared down at Mr. Two's bloody form. All you have to do is change back into Nami to keep me from finishing you. Sorry, but I'm done. I can't even move. Bone Clay said. You've won, finish me dude. Baroque works will either way for my failure. He said as he continued talking before he saw Sanji reach a hand down to him to help him up. You fought hard. It was a good fight. Plus, we don't need more words. Sanji said with a smile as he helped Mr. Two sit up. This is what respect between rivals feels like. I'm not gonna cry. He thought as tears and snot streamed down his face before Sanji brought his foot down on his face, picked up Johnny's glasses, and walked off. I'll be taking back my friend's shades now. See ya. Sanji said as he kept walking and fixed his suit. I'll be surprised if I have any ribs left unbroken. But Vivi at the palace. Vivi and Chaka watched as guards were carrying out her orders to cover the palace with explosives. Are we really gonna destroy the palace, Princess Vivi? Asked a nervous guard. This palace has over 4,000 years of history to it. Vivi said as she looked at it while memories of her childhood went through her mind. But by destroying it, we can gain the people's attention long enough for me to tell them all about this horrible conspiracy. Now, light your fuses. She ordered. All the guards were about to do so, only for their torches to be snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind full of sand that flung the guards around. Vivi went to one to ask if they were okay, only for the guard to fall unconscious before hearing Crocodile's laugh. I'd advise against destroying this palace, Miss Wednesday. He said as he appeared with Cobra under his arm and Nico Robin standing next to him. After all, this is about to become my home. It's perfect to look down upon all the rats below. Vivi could only glare up at him along with Chaka. Where's Luffy? She demanded. Luffy? Oh, you mean that rookie with the straw hat? He asked, though his tone said that he knew who she was talking about. He fought valiantly, but I'm afraid that he's dead. He said. Vivi looked ready to kill as Crocodile's horrible laughter filled the area around them. Luffy dead? Vivi said in anger. I don't believe you. Believe it or don't, it doesn't change the fact that it's true. Crocodile said as he looked down on her with a grin. Still, I won't deny that he was good enough to be able to hit me, but it was all in vain. He said. Vivi just glared at him in anger as Crocodile spoke of Luffy's death as the sound of the soldiers trying to break in were heard at the doors but stopped when multiple hands sprouted out of the doors. Crocodile then pinned Cobra to the wall with two spikes sticking into his arms, angering Vivi further. "Release the king," Chaka demanded. "I think not," Crocodile said in a smug tone. "Since this kingdom will die, it's only fitting the royal family dies with it," he said before turning to Cobra and stating what he wanted, which was the entire reason he was planning to take over Alabasta. To obtain the ancient weapon Pluton. With it, he could turn Alabasta into an invincible nation that which even the world government couldn't oppose. Robin's eyes were shadowed by her hat as she listened as Crocodile went on, dropping the biggest bombshell of them all on them. At 4:30, when the rebels had finally gotten into the square and fought with the Royal Army's main force, a bomb designed to take out 5 kilometers would be fired, destroying both armies in one shot. "Enough," Chaka yelled as he drew his sword. "I refuse to listen to this any longer." With Nami and Nojiko. Both sisters were hiding in an empty street as they were catching their breath and listening to the sound of the two armies killing each other. "SVV couldn't stop them at the gate," Nami said. "Sounds like it," Nojiko replied. "All of them are fighting for what they believe in, yet we're running," said Nami as she slid down the wall. "Then let's stop running," Nojiko said as she stood up and held her hand out to Nami. Nami looked up to see her sister smiling down at her. "The whole reason we're fighting is for our friend VV, right?" "Yeah," Nami said with a smile as she took her sister's hand and stood up before bringing out the weapon she asked Usopp to make for her. "No more running. It's 2 against 1 anyhow," she said. Nojiko nodded before a spike shot out of the wall, piercing her shoulder hard enough to lift her off the ground before retracting, leaving Nami to fall to the ground hard. "Nami!" Nojiko yelled as she ran to her while more spikes pierced the wall before a hole fell open, revealing Miss Doublefinger. "What was that about 2 against 1? She asked as she walked towards them both. "Miss Doublefinger," Nami thought as she grabbed her shoulder. "How'd you pierce that wall?" Nojiko demanded. "That would be the power of the spike fruit," she said with a smile while making spikes appear from her sleeve. "It lets me turn any part of my body into spikes. Spikes that can pierce stone walls with ease," Nami thought. "One slip up and we're dead." "So what?" Nojiko said as Nami got her weapon ready. Miss Doublefinger raised an eyebrow as they both got ready to fight. Nami reformed her new weapon, the Kleem attacked, and performed her first attack, which released a few doves into the air. "Look at that," Nami said with a smile as the other two women looked in confusion. "Piece of shit," she screamed as she threw it to the ground before falling to her knees. "Is she okay?" Miss Doublefinger asked. "New weapon," Nojiko answered. "Never been tested." "It is new," Nami said before reforming it again. "But it can do more than let birds fly," she yelled as she shot out a bouquet of flowers. "See? Flowers," she said with a smile. "Stupid weapon," she screamed as she threw it to the ground again. "I asked for a weapon, not a gimmick stick." I can't help but pity her, Miss Doublefinger thought as Nojiko shook her head. "Nami," Nojiko yelled, getting her attention. "Usopp gave you an instruction manual for that thing, right?" "Well, yeah. He did," Nami said. "Then figure out how to work that thing," she said pulling out her knife. "I'll hold her off." Miss Doublefinger only chuckled at Nojiko's bravery. "She can have all the time in the world," she said as she turned her hands into 2 giant spikes. "It won't save either of you from death." But Johnny and Yusaku, the swordsman duo, along with Eyelash, were running through the city, dodging attacks from both armies as they searched for their friends. "Hey!" came a shout as they ran down an alley. All 3 of them backtracked for a moment to see Sanji running towards them. "Brother Cook!" yelled the swordsman as Sanji joined them. "You're alive. That means you won," Yusaku yelled. "Of course I won. I'd be dead if I lost," he said before holding Johnny's broken shades. "Here's your sunglasses. They didn't survive the fight though." Johnny said with a sigh. "I'll get a new pair. Just glad you're alive, brother." "Anyway, either of you seen Vivi or the ladies?" Sanji asked. "No," Johnny said. "What about the rest of our friends?" Yusaku said. "Those morons will be fine," Sanji said as he took a drag from his smoke. "Our ladies all he thinks about," the swordsman thought. "Anyway, I'm heading back outside the city," Sanji said. "I left Alvida and Valerie there with Jin and Chopper. That huge explosion from earlier was around the area they were in. Let's go." "Right," they said as they followed Sanji. With Nami and Nojiko. Miss Doublefinger wasn't giving either of them an edge as she rapidly attacked them with her spikes. Both of them were dodging as best they could before she pinned Nojiko to the wall by her shoulder. Before she could strike with her other spiked hand, Nojiko took her knife and stabbed her arm, making her pull back in pain, allowing Nojiko to escape. "HMPH. Guess you have some fight in you," she said as she glared at Nojiko. "At least, more than the redhead there." "Shut up," Nami yelled, more pissed off than usual. She had read the instructions from start to finish and was not pleased with them at all, seeing as all of them were designed for parties. "I'm gonna kill you, Usopp," she yelled before the last sentence caught her eye. That concludes Side A. For attacks, see Side B. Enough stalling. Miss Doublefinger cried out as she lunged for her. Nami looked at her in shock and horror as the spike user closed in on her. "Die. Back off." No-G-Ko yelled as she intercepted Miss Doublefinger with her pistol. She pulled back to avoid being shot, but her right cheek was grazed. "TCH. Big mistake," she said as she turned her attack to No-G-Ko, attacking her injured shoulder, tearing it open even more. "No-G-Ko." Nami yelled before glaring at Miss Doublefinger. "That's enough," she said as she stood up, ripped her clothing a bit to move around a bit easier, and got into an attack stance. She had skimmed the instructions a bit and got a clear idea of how each part of her clean attack worked. "Oh? You finally ready to fight?" she asked with a smile. "That's right. I've spent 8 long years fighting for my life. I'm not running anymore," she said as she began blowing strange bubbles at her. One shoots warm air, another shoots cold air, and the third shoots out weak bits of electricity. She thought as she remembered the instructions, none of which hurt her in the slightest. "If all you're going to do is more magic, then I'm going to end this right now," she said as 2 giant spikes appeared from under her feet, lifting her into the air before she started walking towards Nami. Sewing stinger. Nami ran for her life while reading more of instructions before a spike shot through her left leg, making her trip and fall to the ground. "I've had enough of your games, girl," she said as she made a multitude of spikes appear from under her foot. "Stinger step," she called out before getting blasted away into some barrels and boxes, courtesy of Nami's weapon. "Huh?" Nami said as looked at her weapon, which returned to her. After a moment, she realized that the cold and warm air rods could be used as a throwing weapon, causing a powerful gust of wind when then hit an opponent, despite Usopp's instructions that it was just a fancy boomerang. She read more instruction before being skewered by Miss Doublefinger. "Never turn your back in a fight," she said. "Nami?" No-G-Ko screamed in horror before a dove from before fly through Nami, who disappeared into thin air. "Huh? What?" Miss Doublefinger said in shock before turning around to see Nami smiling at her. Nami then explained how she used the cool ball to create a mirage of herself at close distance. No-G-Ko sighed in relief as Nami got ready to fight once more, remembering what Usopp had told her about her mind being the true weapon. Miss Doublefinger looked ready to attack before a gunshot rang out and she dropped to one knee with a bullet in her thigh. She glared at No-G-Ko who was smiling at her with a smoking pistol. "Seems you still have some life in you," she growled as her hair turned into a spiked afro before charging at her. "Sea urchin stinger." "Crap." No-G-Ko yelled as she jumped out of the way, dodging her attack as she ran into a stone wall, leaving nothing but a huge circle inside. "No way I would have survived that," she said. "Is running and dodging all you two know how to do?" Miss Doublefinger asked, not seeing the tiny cloud that Nami was creating above her. "The cloud?" No-G-Ko thought before Nami cast an electric ball into it, making it rumble and pulse with electricity. No-G-Ko ran just as Miss Doublefinger looked up to see lightning shoot out of it and striking her. Neither Nami or No-G-Ko said anything as Miss Doublefinger stood there in a daze before she glared at Nami, finally losing whatever patience she had with them. "I've had enough of this," she said as she slipped off her jacket and turned her fingers into spikes before jamming them into her arms. Spike doping," she said as the muscles in her arms strengthened and bulged under her skin. "Uh-oh," Nami said as the spike woman ran towards her. "Stinger, flail," she yelled as she swung her spiky arm at her. Nami dodged, letting her opponent demolish everything else in her path with ease. "She's not playing around anymore," No-G-Ko said. "Time to finish this," Nami thought as Miss Doublefinger struck another one of her mirages. She raised her clean attack as she prepared her final attack, but fumbled as the pain in her leg got to her. "Trouble standing?" Miss Doublefinger asked with a grin while turning her hair spiky again. "Let me put you out of your misery," she said. Before she could act however, she found herself being blinded by No-G-Ko's white cloak. "Hurry Nami," she yelled as Miss Doublefinger struggled for a moment before using her spikes to shred the cloak to pieces. She looked pissed before seeing Nami point the weapon at her at point-blank range. "Tornado tempo," Nami yelled as the clean attack shot out 2 toy birds from each side of her. All life seemed to have drained from Nami's eyes as she thought it was all over before the toys wound around Miss Doublefinger, tying her up before spinning at high speeds. No-G-Ko and Nami watched as Miss Doublefinger was shot through 2 walls before lying unconscious on the ground. We did it," she said as she slid down the wall. "We certainly did," No-G-Ko said as she sat next to her sister and smiled. "Nice job sis." "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you No-G-Ko. Actually, I believe that you could have handled her all on your own," No-G-Ko said, making Nami smile at her. With Grace and Greg. Tick 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 tick. Greg, please tell me I'm dreaming. Grace said in a weak voice. She and Greg had subdued the Mr. 7 pair with ease, but were now staring down the barrel of a huge cannon in horror. No, that would be a lie. Greg said as he stared at the bomb inside the cannon, or rather the timer that was on the bomb that was slowly ticking away. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day, and if you made it here, comment below something about the fanfic.